The War Master's betrayal at Istvan III had shattered the galaxy's understanding of loyalty and brotherhood, but Horus Lupercal possessed a strategic mind that extended far beyond simple rebellion. As the embers of the drop site massacre still smoldered on Istvan V, the former Luna Wolf began implementing a campaign of calculated psychological warfare designed to eliminate his most dangerous opponents among the loyalist primarchs. The Blood Angels Legion, led by the beloved Sanguinius, represented a particularly thorny problem for the traitor forces. Their primarch's reputation for nobility and tactical brilliance, combined with the Legion's fierce combat effectiveness, made them a priority target for neutralization before any assault on Terra could commence. Horus understood that direct confrontation with Sanguinius would prove costly and potentially unsuccessful. The Angel's prowess in battle was legendary even among his superhuman brothers, and the Blood Angels had demonstrated their tactical flexibility across countless campaigns during the Great Crusade. More importantly, Sanguinius commanded deep respect among the other primarchs and held significant influence within the broader Imperial hierarchy. His death in honorable combat might only serve to galvanize loyalist resistance and create a martyr whose memory could inspire continued opposition to Horus's cause. Instead, the War Master chose a more insidious approach that would exploit the very virtues that made Sanguinius so beloved. The plan required patience, careful coordination with demonic allies, and an intimate understanding of the Blood Angel's psychological makeup. Horus had fought alongside his winged brother for decades during the Great Crusade, observing his reactions to various tactical situations and noting the patterns of behavior that defined Sanguinius's command philosophy. The Angel's greatest strength lay in his unwavering commitment to protecting Imperial citizens and his inability to ignore calls for aid from those in desperate need. The forged distress signal that would eventually lure the Blood Angels to their doom in the Signus Cluster represented a masterpiece of psychological manipulation. The transmission appeared to originate from multiple worlds within the Signus system, each supposedly under assault by a massive xenos incursion that threatened to spill over into neighboring sectors. The signal bore all the appropriate Imperial authentication codes and contained detailed tactical assessments that painted a picture of desperate defenders holding out against overwhelming odds. Most crucially, the message specifically requested the intervention of the Blood Angels, citing their reputation for rapid deployment and exceptional combat effectiveness against alien threats. The fabricated intelligence reports spoke of hive fleets descending upon agricultural worlds, their populations trapped in sprawling urban centers, while alien monstrosities stalked the surrounding countryside. Refugee camps overflowing with displaced civilians supposedly dotted the outer planets of the system, their inhabitants facing starvation and disease, while local defense forces struggled to maintain order. The distress calls included audio recordings of panicked Vox operators describing scenes of carnage and desperation, their voices carefully modulated to convey authentic terror and urgency. Horus's agents within the Imperial bureaucracy ensured that these fabricated reports reached Sanguinius through multiple channels, creating the impression of independent verification from different sources. Astropathic communications, courier ship dispatches, and even intercepted enemy transmissions all seem to confirm the dire situation unfolding in the Signus Cluster. The psychological profile of Sanguinius suggested he would be unable to ignore such overwhelming evidence of Imperial citizens in mortal peril, regardless of any strategic considerations that might counsel caution. The creation of the demon worlds within the Signus system required extensive preparation and the direct involvement of powerful entities from the warp. The process began months before the first distress signals were transmitted, as greater demons of chaos worked to weaken the barriers between reality and the immaterium throughout the targeted star system. These ancient beings possessed the knowledge and power necessary to fundamentally alter the physical laws governing entire worlds, transforming previously habitable planets into nightmarish landscapes that served as staging grounds for demonic legions. The demon world of Signus Prime underwent the most dramatic transformation, its surface reshaped into a twisted mockery of Imperial architecture, mixed with organic growths that pulsed with malevolent life. Towering spires of bone and metal stretched toward the blood-red sky, their surfaces covered in writhing tentacles and screaming faces that had once belonged to the world's original inhabitants. The atmosphere itself became thick with psychic energy, creating an environment where the normal laws of physics bent and warped according to the whims of chaos. Lesser demons swarmed across the transformed landscape, their forms shifting and changing as they fed on the psychic emanations of terror and despair that permeated the system. These creatures served as both foot soldiers and living components of the trap being prepared for the Blood Angels, their presence ensuring that any Imperial forces entering the system would face immediate and overwhelming opposition. The demons' ability to manifest in real space without the usual limitations imposed by stable reality gave them significant advantages over conventional military forces. The greater demons responsible for orchestrating this transformation possessed an intimate understanding of the Blood Angels' combat doctrines and psychological vulnerabilities. They had studied the Legion's battle records extensively, analyzing patterns of deployment, preferred tactical formations, and the specific triggers that might provoke the Red Thirst among the Space Marines. This knowledge informed every aspect of the trap's design, from the placement of defensive positions to the selection of demon types that would prove most effective against Astartes' opponents. The terraforming process required careful coordination between multiple greater demons, each contributing their unique abilities to the overall effort. Bloodthirsters of Khorne provided the raw destructive power necessary to reshape planetary surfaces, while Lords of Change from Tzeentch wove complex illusions and temporal distortions throughout the system. Great Unclean Ones of Nurgle introduced plagues and corruption that would weaken any Imperial forces attempting to establish footholds on the transformed worlds, and Keepers of Secrets from Slaanesh created sensory experiences designed to overwhelm and disorient the Blood Angels' enhanced perceptions. The strategic importance of the Signus Campaign within Horus's broader war plan cannot be overstated. The Warmaster faced the daunting task of eliminating or neutralizing multiple Loyalist legions, while simultaneously preparing for an eventual assault on Terra itself. Each loyal Primarch represented a significant threat to his ultimate objectives, but some posed greater dangers than others based on their tactical abilities, political influence, and personal relationships with the Emperor. Sanguinius occupied a unique position among the Primarchs due to his close personal bond with the Emperor and his role as one of the most respected figures within the Imperial hierarchy. His death or corruption would remove a powerful military asset from the Loyalist cause while potentially demoralizing other Imperial forces who looked to the Angel as a symbol of hope and righteousness. More importantly, Sanguinius possessed prophetic abilities that might allow him to perceive aspects of Horus's plans before they could be implemented, making his elimination a matter of strategic necessity. The timing of the Signus Campaign coincided with other major operations designed to fragment Loyalist resistance and prevent coordinated opposition to the traitor advance. While the Blood Angels were being lured into the demon-infested Signus system, other traitor forces were moving against the Ultramarines at Calth and preparing to engage the Dark Angels in the Thramas sector. This multi-pronged approach would prevent the Loyalist legions from supporting each other and force them to fight isolated battles against superior numbers. The psychological warfare aspects of the campaign extended beyond simple deception to encompass a deeper understanding of the Blood Angels' genetic flaws and behavioral patterns. The Legion's struggle with the Red Thirst and the Black Rage represented vulnerabilities that could be exploited through careful manipulation of battlefield conditions. The demon worlds of the Signus system were specifically designed to trigger these genetic predispositions, creating environments where the Blood Angels' greatest strengths might become crippling weaknesses. The selection of demon types and their deployment patterns reflected extensive research into the specific triggers that activated the Red Thirst among Blood Angel Space Marines. Certain combinations of sensory stimuli, particularly those involving the scent and sight of blood, could push individual Astartes beyond their normal psychological controls and into states of berserker fury that made them dangerous to friend and foe alike. The greater demons orchestrating the trap understood these mechanisms and incorporated them into every aspect of their preparations. The corruption of the Signus system also served as a testing ground for techniques that might prove useful in future operations against other loyalist forces. The methods developed for weakening the barriers between real space and the warp could be adapted for use against different target worlds, while the psychological manipulation tactics employed against the Blood Angels might be modified to exploit the specific vulnerabilities of other Space Marine legions. The logistical challenges of maintaining demon manifestations across multiple worlds simultaneously required careful resource management and strategic planning. The greater demons involved in the operation needed to balance their energy expenditure between maintaining their physical forms, powering the reality-altering effects that transformed the target worlds, and commanding the lesser demon forces under their control. This delicate equilibrium could be disrupted by unexpected developments or particularly effective resistance from Imperial forces. The communication networks established throughout the corrupted system allowed for real-time coordination between different demon factions and provided early warning of approaching Imperial fleets. These networks relied on psychic connections rather than conventional technology, making them difficult for Imperial forces to detect or disrupt using standard countermeasures. The demons could share tactical information instantaneously across vast distances and adapt their strategies based on developing battlefield conditions. As the fabricated distress signals from the Signus system reached the Blood Angels' fleet, they found one of the most formidable military formations in the galaxy at the absolute peak of its power. The Ninth Legion had emerged from the fires of the Great Crusade as a perfectly balanced instrument of war, combining the savage fury of close-quarters combat specialists with the tactical sophistication demanded by complex void warfare and planetary assault operations. Their reputation preceded them across the galaxy, striking fear into the hearts of xenos races and inspiring confidence among Imperial army regiments fortunate enough to fight alongside the Angels' sons. The Legion's organizational structure reflected decades of refinement under Sanguinius's guidance, evolving from the crude tribal hierarchies of their Terran origins into a sophisticated command apparatus capable of coordinating multiple simultaneous campaigns across vast distances. At full strength, the Blood Angels numbered approximately 120,000 Space Marines organized into 10 companies, each specializing in specific aspects of warfare, while maintaining the flexibility to adapt to changing battlefield conditions. This numerical strength placed them among the larger legions, though their true power lay not in raw numbers, but in the exceptional quality of their individual warriors and the synergy achieved through their unique combat doctrines. The assault companies formed the beating heart of Blood Angels' tactical philosophy, representing the culmination of centuries of experience in close-quarters combat across every conceivable battlefield environment. These formations consisted of specially selected Space Marines who had demonstrated exceptional prowess in melee combat, enhanced reflexes that bordered on prescience, and the psychological stability necessary to channel the Legion's genetic predisposition toward violence into controlled tactical applications. Each assault company maintained its own complement of jump pack-equipped warriors, Thunderhawk gunships, and specialized equipment designed for rapid deployment and overwhelming close-quarters attacks. The first company, known as the Archangels, stood apart from their brothers as the Legion's premier assault formation. These veterans had fought alongside Sanguinius himself in the most desperate battles of the Great Crusade, earning their positions through demonstrated courage and tactical acumen rather than simple seniority. Their armor bore the scars of countless engagements, each mark telling the story of victories won through superior skill and unwavering determination. The Archangels served as both an elite strike force and a training cadre for the rest of the Legion, their combat techniques studied and emulated by younger Space Marines seeking to master the art of close-quarters warfare. The tactical flexibility of Blood Angels, assault companies, stemmed from their ability to transition seamlessly between different combat roles depending on mission requirements. During void warfare operations, they served as boarding specialists capable of cutting through enemy ship defenses with surgical precision. Planetary assault missions saw them deployed as shock troops, using their jump packs to bypass enemy fortifications and strike at critical command nodes behind enemy lines. When facing xenos threats that relied on overwhelming numbers, the assault companies could adapt their formations to create killing zones that maximized their close combat advantages while minimizing exposure to ranged attacks. The Legion's heavy assault companies represented a different approach to the same fundamental tactical philosophy, emphasizing durability and sustained combat effectiveness over rapid deployment and mobility. These formations fielded larger numbers of Terminator armored veterans, supported by dreadnought walkers and specialized siege equipment capable of breaching the most formidable defensive positions. The heavy assault companies had proven their worth during the Siege of Melchior, where they spent 3 weeks fighting through underground tunnel networks against a xenos species that had evolved specifically for subterranean warfare. Beyond their renowned assault capabilities, the Blood Angels maintained tactical companies that rivaled any in the galaxy for their combined arms effectiveness and strategic flexibility. These formations integrated heavy weapons specialists, reconnaissance elements, and support personnel into cohesive units capable of independent operation across multiple theaters simultaneously. The tactical companies had distinguished themselves during the compliance of Kavas, where they coordinated with Imperial army formations to execute a complex planetary assault that involved simultaneous strikes on 17 different continents. The Legion's reconnaissance companies operated with a level of independence that would have been impossible in more rigid military organizations. Their commanders granted broad discretionary authority to pursue objectives that supported overall strategic goals without requiring constant communication with higher command levels. These units specialized in deep penetration missions behind enemy lines, gathering intelligence on Xenos' military capabilities and identifying critical vulnerabilities that could be exploited by follow-up assault forces. Their success rate in these dangerous missions reflected both their exceptional training and the leadership philosophy that encouraged initiative and creative problem-solving at all levels of command. Sanguinius's approach to leadership differed markedly from many of his brother primarchs, emphasizing personal relationships and emotional connections rather than rigid hierarchical control. The Angel understood that his gene sons inherited not only enhanced physical capabilities, but also heightened emotional responses that could be channeled into exceptional combat effectiveness when properly managed. His leadership style focused on inspiring loyalty through personal example rather than demanding obedience through fear or intimidation, creating a command structure that functioned more like an extended family than a traditional military organization. The Primarch's inner circle consisted of captains who had earned their positions through demonstrated competence and unwavering loyalty, but more importantly, through their ability to understand and implement his vision for the Legion's future development. Captain Raldoron of the 1st Company served as the Legion's first captain, a position that carried both tactical responsibilities and significant influence over strategic planning. His relationship with Sanguinius extended beyond simple military hierarchy, encompassing a deep personal friendship built over decades of shared combat experience and mutual respect. Captain Askelin commanded the Sanguinary Guard, an elite formation that served as both the Primarch's personal bodyguard and a symbol of the Legion's highest aspirations. The selection process for the Sanguinary Guard involved not only exceptional combat skills, but also psychological evaluations designed to identify Space Marines capable of resisting the Red Thirst even under extreme stress. Askelin's role required him to balance the competing demands of protecting Sanguinius while ensuring that the Sanguinary Guard remained an effective combat unit rather than mere ceremonial troops. The relationship between Sanguinius and his captains reflected his understanding that effective leadership required trust and delegation rather than micromanagement. Each captain enjoyed considerable autonomy in managing their companies, with the primarch providing strategic guidance and overall direction, while allowing his subordinates to develop their own tactical approaches. This leadership philosophy had produced a generation of Space Marine commanders capable of independent action and creative problem-solving, qualities that would prove essential during the trials that lay ahead. The Blood Angels fleet represented one of the most formidable naval formations in Imperial service, combining powerful warships with exceptional crew training and tactical coordination. The battle barge Red Tier served as the Legion's flagship, a massive vessel whose weapon systems and defensive capabilities had been enhanced through decades of continuous upgrades and modifications. The ship's machine spirit had developed an almost symbiotic relationship with its crew, responding to tactical commands with a speed and precision that bordered on the supernatural. The Red Tier's combat record included victories against some of the most dangerous xenos fleets encountered during the Great Crusade, from the crystalline warships of the Crave to the biomechanical monstrosities fielded by the Rangdan. The vessel's weapon systems had been customized to support the Blood Angels' preferred tactical approaches, with enhanced boarding torpedo launchers and specialized fighter bays designed to deploy assault marines directly into enemy ship corridors. The ship's apothecarian facilities rivaled those found on dedicated medical vessels, reflecting the Legion's commitment to preserving the lives of wounded battle brothers. The strike cruiser formations that accompanied the Red Tier provided the fleet with tactical flexibility and the ability to conduct multiple simultaneous operations across different star systems. Each strike cruiser carried a full company of Space Marines along with their supporting equipment, creating self-contained military units capable of independent action when strategic circumstances demanded dispersed operations. The strike cruisers Angel's Wrath, Blade of Vengeance, and Crimson Blade had each earned their own battle honors during the Great Crusade, their crews developing specialized expertise in different aspects of void warfare. The Legion's escort squadrons consisted of destroyers and frigates that had been modified to support the Blood Angels' emphasis on rapid deployment and close-quarters combat. These smaller vessels carried enhanced sensor arrays for detecting enemy fleet movements and specialized equipment for coordinating complex assault operations. The escort captains had developed innovative tactical doctrines that maximized their ship's effectiveness despite their relatively limited firepower, using speed and maneuverability to create opportunities for the larger vessels to deliver decisive strikes. The combat record accumulated by the Blood Angels during the Great Crusade established them as one of the most effective and reliable legions in Imperial service. Their victories spanned every conceivable type of warfare, from void battles against technologically advanced xenos fleets to grinding siege operations against heavily fortified enemy positions. The compliance of the Cheraut system demonstrated their ability to coordinate complex multiplanetary campaigns, while their performance during the Ulanor Crusade showcased their effectiveness when operating as part of larger Imperial formations. The Legion's reputation among Loyalist forces reflected both their combat effectiveness and their conduct during victory. Unlike some legions that had earned reputations for excessive brutality or questionable tactical decisions, the Blood Angels maintained high standards of behavior that earned them respect from Imperial Army commanders and civilian populations alike. Their willingness to accept casualties in order to minimize collateral damage had sometimes resulted in higher Space Marine losses, but it had also created a reservoir of goodwill that proved invaluable during complex compliance operations. Even among the traitor forces now arrayed against the Imperium, the Blood Angels commanded grudging respect for their martial prowess and tactical acumen. Former allies who had turned to chaos understood the threat posed by Sanguinius and his legion, recognizing that their loyalty to the Emperor would make them implacable enemies in the coming conflict. The decision to target the Blood Angels for elimination through deception rather than direct confrontation reflected this understanding. acknowledging that conventional military approaches would likely prove costly and potentially unsuccessful. The Legion's gene seed stability had remained remarkably consistent throughout the Great Crusade, with recruitment rates and Space Marine production maintaining steady levels despite the constant demands of active campaigning. The Blood Angels' homeworld of Baal provided a steady stream of recruits whose genetic compatibility with the Legion's enhancement procedures exceeded average rates found among other legions. This genetic stability contributed to the Legion's overall effectiveness by ensuring that replacement Space Marines could be integrated into existing formations without extensive retraining or adaptation periods. The psychological conditioning programs developed by the Legion's chaplains and librarians had proven effective in managing the genetic predispositions inherited by all Blood Angel Space Marines. The Red Thirst remained a constant challenge, but careful monitoring and intervention had prevented it from becoming a significant tactical liability during most combat operations. The techniques developed for recognizing and managing the early stages of the condition had been refined through decades of experience, creating a comprehensive support system that allowed affected Space Marines to continue serving effectively. The Signus system had once represented the Imperium's vision of successful expansion and colonization, its 7 worlds serving as a testament to humanity's ability to transform hostile environments into thriving centers of civilization. Located in the Ultima Segmentum, the system occupied a strategically vital position along major warp routes that connected the core Imperial worlds with the expanding frontier territories. Its proximity to several xenos-controlled sectors made it an essential staging ground for military operations, while its agricultural output and industrial capacity supported Imperial expansion efforts across dozens of neighboring systems. Cygnus Prime, the system's primary world, had been transformed from a barren rock into a bustling hive whirled through centuries of careful terraforming and industrial development. The planet's surface featured massive urban complexes that housed millions of Imperial citizens, their towering spires reaching toward the sky in defiance of the harsh environmental conditions that had once made the world uninhabitable. The primary hive, Signus Majoris, served as the system's administrative center and housed the planetary governor's palace, a magnificent structure that symbolized Imperial authority and human achievement. The world's industrial districts produced everything from basic agricultural equipment to sophisticated void ship components, their manufactorums operating around the clock to meet the constant demands of Imperial expansion. The forges of Cygnus Prime had supplied weapons and equipment for dozens of compliance campaigns, their output earning recognition from the Mechanicum for both quality and reliability. The planet's orbital shipyards constructed escort vessels and transport ships that served throughout the Ultima Segmentum, their designs incorporating innovations developed by local tech, adepts working in collaboration with Mars-trained engineers. Cygnus Secundus functioned as the system's primary agricultural world, its vast continents covered with carefully managed farmland that produced food for export to less fortunate Imperial worlds. The planet's climate had been artificially stabilized through atmospheric processors and orbital mirrors, creating optimal growing conditions for a wide variety of crops. The agricultural communes that dotted the planet's surface represented model communities where Imperial citizens lived in harmony with the natural environment while contributing to the greater good of humanity. The world's population consisted primarily of farming families whose ancestors had volunteered for the original colonization efforts, their descendants maintaining the same dedication to hard work and Imperial loyalty that had made the settlement possible. The planetary defense forces recruited from these agricultural communities had earned reputations for determination and marksmanship, their knowledge of local terrain making them formidable opponents for any enemy forces that might attempt planetary invasion. Cygnus Tertius served as the system's primary mining world, its surface scarred by massive excavation operations that extracted rare minerals essential for advanced Imperial technology. The planet's crust contained significant deposits of adamantium and other strategic materials, making it a crucial resource for the Imperial war machine. The mining operations employed hundreds of thousands of workers who lived in underground cities carved directly into the planetary bedrock, their communities forming complex social networks that had evolved over generations of shared hardship and mutual dependence. The mining guilds that controlled different sectors of the planet maintained their own security forces and operated semi-autonomous governments under the oversight of Imperial administrators. These organizations had developed sophisticated techniques for extracting maximum value from the planet's mineral resources while maintaining acceptable safety standards for their workers. The guild leaders served as informal advisors to the planetary governor, their expertise in resource management proving invaluable for long-term strategic planning. Signus Quartus housed the system's primary military installations, including training facilities for the Imperial Guard regiments recruited from across the 7 worlds. The planet's surface featured extensive military bases, weapons testing ranges, and fortified positions that could serve as fallback positions in the event of enemy invasion. The Signus Guard regiments trained on this world had earned commendations for their performance in combat operations across multiple sectors, their disciplined approach to warfare reflecting the high standards maintained by their training cadre. The world's strategic importance extended beyond simple military training, as it also served as a major logistics hub for Imperial operations throughout the region. The massive supply depots scattered across the planet's surface contained stockpiles of weapons, ammunition, and equipment sufficient to support extended military campaigns. The transportation networks that connected these facilities represented marvels of Imperial engineering, capable of moving vast quantities of material with remarkable efficiency. The outer worlds of the system, Signus Quintus, Sextus, and Septimus, served specialized functions that supported the overall strategic value of the system. Quintus operated as a research station where Imperial scientists studied xenos artifacts and developed new technologies for military applications. Sextus functioned as a communications relay station that maintained contact with Imperial forces operating in distant sectors. Septimus served as a quarantine world where potentially dangerous materials and organisms could be studied under controlled conditions. The transformation of these worlds into demon-infested nightmares began with subtle alterations to the local warp currents that surrounded the system. Greater demons working in coordination with traitor sorcerers gradually weakened the barriers between real space and the immaterium, creating conditions where demonic manifestations could occur without the usual restrictions imposed by stable reality. This process required months of careful preparation, as the demons needed to avoid detection by Imperial astropaths and other psychers who might recognize the signs of warp corruption. The corruption spread through the system like a plague, affecting different worlds in ways that reflected the specific nature of the demonic entities responsible for their transformation. Cygnus Prime underwent the most dramatic changes, its towering hive spires becoming twisted amalgamations of metal and living tissue that pulsed with malevolent energy. The streets that had once bustled with Imperial citizens became hunting grounds for demon packs, their surfaces slick with blood and other fluids that defied identification. The planetary population did not simply die during this transformation, they became integral components of the demonic ecosystem that emerged from the corruption process. Their bodies served as raw material for the creation of demon hosts, while their souls provided the psychic energy necessary to maintain the reality warping effects that transformed the physical environment. The screams of the dying and the damned created a psychic resonance that attracted even more powerful demonic entities, establishing a feedback loop that accelerated the corruption process. The Cathedral of the Mark emerged from the ruins of the planetary governor's palace, its architecture defying conventional understanding of structural engineering and aesthetic design. The building's walls consisted of living bone that grew and shifted according to the whims of the demon prince that had claimed the structure as its primary manifestation point. The cathedral's interior featured vast chambers where the boundaries between floor, wall, and ceiling became meaningless, creating spaces that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The demon prince Ka'Bandha had claimed dominion over Signus Prime, his presence transforming the world into a reflection of Khorne's realm within the warp. The Bloodthirster's influence could be felt in every aspect of the planet's corrupted environment, from the rivers of blood that flowed through the former city streets to the skull-topped spires that replaced the original Imperial architecture. The demon's power extended beyond simple physical transformation, affecting the very laws of physics that govern the planet's existence. Under Ka'Bandha's influence, the planet's gravity fluctuated according to the demon's emotional state, creating areas where warriors could leap impossible distances or become crushed under their own weight without warning. The atmosphere itself became charged with psychic energy that could drive unprotected humans insane within minutes of exposure. The temperature variations across the planet's surface created microclimates that ranged from Arctic cold to volcanic heat, often within the span of a few hundred meters. The lesser demons that swarmed across the transformed landscape served multiple functions within the overall trap being prepared for the Blood Angels. Bloodletters formed the backbone of the demonic armies, their supernatural strength and resilience making them formidable opponents for even Space Marine forces. Fleshhounds prowled the ruins of former cities, their ability to track psychic emanations making them perfect hunters for pursuing fleeing enemies. Demon engines constructed from the remains of Imperial vehicles and the tortured souls of their former crews provided heavy weapons support and siege capabilities. The corruption of Signus Secundus followed a different pattern, with the agricultural world becoming a twisted parody of its former fertility. The carefully tended farmlands became fields of razor-sharp grass that could slice through ceramite armor, while the fruit trees produced offerings that drove those who consumed them into homicidal frenzies. The atmospheric processors that had once maintained optimal growing conditions now spewed toxic clouds that transformed any organic matter they touched into demon spawn. The farming communities that had once represented model Imperial settlements became charnel houses, where the former inhabitants served as unwilling participants in obscene rituals designed to strengthen the demonic presence throughout the system. The barns and storage facilities that had once housed agricultural equipment became spawning grounds for demon creatures that defied classification, their forms combining elements of various chaos entities with the agricultural tools and machinery they had consumed. Signus Tertius presented perhaps the most disturbing transformation, as the mining world's underground cities became labyrinthine networks of tunnels that extended far deeper than any human excavation had ever reached. The demon entities that claimed the world had connected the existing mine shafts with passages that led directly into the warp, creating a three-dimensional maze where the laws of physics became increasingly unreliable the deeper one traveled. The mining equipment that had once extracted valuable minerals from the planet's crust now served as components in massive demon engines that burrowed through real space and the immaterium simultaneously. These creatures could emerge from solid rock without warning, their drill-tipped appendages capable of penetrating even Terminator armor with ease. The precious metals that had once made the world valuable to the Imperium had been transformed into demon-touched materials that could corrupt anyone who handled them. The psychic phenomena that isolated the Signus system from potential Imperial reinforcements represented one of the most sophisticated aspects of the trap. The greater demons responsible for the system's corruption had woven a complex web of warp storms and psychic disturbances that made astropathic communication nearly impossible, while simultaneously preventing accurate warp navigation by Imperial fleets. Any ships attempting to enter the system would find themselves caught in temporal distortions that could stretch a journey of days into months or compress weeks of travel into a few terrifying hours. The warp storms surrounding the system created a buffer zone that extended for several light years in all directions, making it impossible for Imperial reinforcements to reach the Blood Angels once they entered the trap. The storm's intensity fluctuated according to patterns that reflected the emotional states of the demon princes controlling them, creating windows of apparent calm that might lure rescue fleets into a tempting passage before the tempests returned with renewed fury. The astropathic interference generated by the demonic presence made it impossible for the Blood Angels to communicate their situation to other Imperial forces, ensuring that their fate would remain unknown until long after the trap had been sprung. The psychic static created by thousands of demon entities manifesting simultaneously overwhelmed any attempts at long-range telepathic communication, while the reality-warping effects of their presence made it impossible to send conventional messenger ships through the surrounding warp storms. The temporal distortions affecting the system created additional complications for any Imperial forces that might attempt to mount rescue operations. Time flowed differently on each of the corrupted worlds, with some experiencing accelerated decay, while others seemed frozen in moments of perpetual agony. These distortions made it impossible to coordinate military operations across multiple worlds simultaneously, as forces deployed to different planets might experience vastly different passage of time during their missions. The transition from warp space into the Signus system occurred with none of the usual violence that characterized emergence into hostile territory. The Red Tier's Gellar field generators cycled down smoothly as the massive battle barge materialized in real space, followed in precise formation by the strike cruisers Angel's Wrath, Blade of Vengeance, and Crimson Blade. The escort squadrons took their assigned positions with practiced efficiency, their captains reporting clear auger readings and stable void conditions across all vessels. For the first few minutes after translation, everything appeared exactly as the distress signals had indicated, a star system under siege, but one where Imperial relief forces might still make a meaningful difference. Captain Raldoron stood beside Sanguinius on the Red Tier's command bridge, studying the tactical displays that showed the positions of the 7 worlds within the Signus system. The initial sensor sweeps revealed scattered debris fields that could indicate recent void battles, while energy signatures from several planetary surfaces suggested ongoing combat operations. The absence of immediate enemy contact allowed the fleet's reconnaissance elements to begin their systematic survey of the system, deploying scout ships and long-range sensor drones to gather detailed intelligence on the tactical situation. The first anomalies became apparent within hours of the fleet's arrival, though their significance would not become clear until much later. The astropathic choir aboard the Red Tier reported increasing difficulty in maintaining communication links with other Imperial forces outside the system, their messages becoming garbled and unreliable despite the relatively short distances involved. The ship's navigator complained of unusual warp current patterns that seemed to shift without warning, creating navigation hazards that had not been present during their approach to the system. Sanguinius himself felt the first stirrings of unease as his enhanced senses detected subtle wrongness in the local environment. The psychic emanations from the various worlds carried undertones that reminded him of battlefields where he had fought against particularly vicious xenos species, but the signatures lacked the alien quality he expected from non-human threats. Instead, they felt disturbingly familiar, carrying echoes of human suffering and corruption that set his teeth on edge and caused his wings to rustle with unconscious agitation. The reconnaissance flights launched towards Cygnus Prime encountered the first concrete evidence that the situation differed dramatically from their initial intelligence reports. Squadron leader Cassiel's Thunderhawk gunship transmitted routine status updates as it approached the planet's upper atmosphere, but the pilot's voice carried increasing tension as his sensors began detecting energy patterns that defied easy classification. The urban centers that should have been visible from orbit appeared distorted through the atmospheric interference, their familiar Imperial architecture replaced by structures that seemed to shift and writhe when observed directly. The Vox transmission from Cassiel's gunship cut off abruptly as the aircraft entered the planet's atmosphere, replaced by static punctuated by sounds that the Red Tier's communications specialists struggled to identify. The interference patterns suggested massive electromagnetic disturbances, but the underlying audio contained elements that resembled screaming voices speaking in languages that predated human civilization. The loss of contact with the reconnaissance flight triggered immediate alerts throughout the Blood Angels fleet, prompting Sanguinius to authorize the deployment of additional scout elements while maintaining the main fleet at a safe distance from the planetary bodies. The tactical assessment conducted by the Legion's senior officers revealed disturbing inconsistencies in the intelligence they had received about the Signus system crisis. The reported xenos invasion showed none of the typical signatures associated with known alien species, while the defensive positions supposedly maintained by Imperial forces displayed energy patterns that more closely resembled chaos corruption than conventional military installations. Captain Ascalon of the Sanguinary Guard expressed particular concern about the psychic emanations detected by the fleet's librarians, noting that they bore uncomfortable similarities to the warp phenomena encountered during the Legion's battles against traitor forces at Istvan. Sanguinius faced a decision that would define the fate of his entire legion. The evidence suggested that the Signus system harbored threats far more dangerous than the xenos incursion described in the original distress signals, but the possibility remained that Imperial citizens were trapped on the corrupted worlds and desperately needed rescue. The Angel's nature compelled him to investigate further rather than withdrawing his forces to safety, but his tactical experience warned that the situation might represent a carefully prepared trap designed to exploit exactly this tendency. The Primarch's analysis of the available options revealed the cruel elegance of the trap that had been prepared for his legion. Withdrawal would mean abandoning any Imperial survivors to whatever fate awaited them on the demon worlds, a choice that violated every principle that guided his leadership philosophy. Advancing into the system with full knowledge of the dangers would risk the destruction of the entire Blood Angels Legion, potentially removing one of the Emperor's most loyal military assets from the ongoing civil war. Either choice served the interests of the traitor forces, demonstrating the sophisticated understanding of his psychology that had informed the trap's design. The first direct demon encounters occurred when Captain Metrion's strike cruiser Angel's Wrath moved closer to Signus Secundus to investigate the agricultural world's status. The ship's auger arrays detected what appeared to be human settlements on the planet's surface, their energy signatures suggesting that some form of civilization persisted despite the obvious corruption affecting the local environment. Metrion authorized the deployment of reconnaissance teams equipped with full environmental protection gear and enhanced sensor equipment, hoping to establish contact with any surviving Imperial forces. The assault marines who descended to the planet's surface in drop pods encountered a landscape that challenged their understanding of reality itself. The farmlands that should have covered the planet's continents had been replaced by fields of crystalline structures that pulsed with inner light, while the agricultural buildings had been transformed into organic growths that resembled massive insects more than human constructions. The atmospheric readings showed breathable air, but the Space Marines' enhanced olfactory senses detected underlying chemical signatures that triggered instinctive revulsion and combat readiness. Sergeant Castor led his squad through what had once been a farming community, their bolters ready as they investigated the twisted remains of Imperial structures. The buildings showed signs of recent habitation, with personal belongings scattered throughout the interiors and cooking fires that still smoldered in primitive hearths. The absence of human remains struck the Space Marines as particularly ominous, suggesting that the former inhabitants had either fled or been transformed rather than simply killed during whatever catastrophe had befallen the world. The first demon manifestation occurred without warning as Castor's squad investigated a structure that had once served as a community meeting hall. The building's interior dimensions seemed larger than its external appearance should have allowed, creating a disorienting effect that made the Space Marines question their enhanced spatial awareness. The temperature dropped suddenly as shadows began moving independently of their sources, coalescing into humanoid shapes that radiated malevolent intelligence and predatory hunger. The bloodletters that materialized from the deepening shadows possessed a terrible beauty that made them even more dangerous than purely monstrous opponents. Their brass armor gleamed with supernatural perfection, while their demon swords crackled with energies that could cleave through ceramite as easily as flesh. The creatures moved with fluid grace that belied their obvious physical power, their movements coordinated with tactical precision that suggested intelligence far beyond that of mindless beasts. Brother Hadrian fell to the first demon attack, his power armor providing no protection against a blade that existed partially outside normal reality. The bloodletter's sword passed through his chest plate without resistance, the demon weapon's edge separating molecular bonds rather than simply cutting through material barriers. Hadrian's death scream carried across the squad's Vox network, alerting his battle brothers to the supernatural nature of their opponents, while simultaneously triggering the first stirrings of the red thirst among the surviving Space Marines. The engagement that followed tested every aspect of Blood Angel's combat doctrine against enemies that operated according to rules that defied conventional military logic. The demons could disappear and reappear at will, making it impossible to establish firing lanes or coordinate overlapping fields of fire. Their supernatural resilience allowed them to continue fighting even after suffering wounds that would have killed any mortal creature, while their demon weapons could penetrate the most sophisticated Imperial armor with contemptuous ease. Sergeant Castor adapted his squad's tactics with the flexibility that characterized Blood Angel's leadership, ordering his men to maintain constant movement while concentrating their fire on individual targets rather than attempting to engage the entire demon pack simultaneously. The Space Marines' enhanced reflexes and combat conditioning allowed them to avoid the worst of the demon attacks, but the psychological pressure of fighting enemies that seemed to violate the fundamental laws of reality began taking its toll on their mental discipline. The Vox reports transmitted back to the Angel's Wrath carried descriptions that challenged the comprehension of even veteran Space Marine officers. Captain Metrian listened to his reconnaissance teams describe enemies that bled liquid fire and spoke in voices that bypassed the ears to resonate directly within the listener's mind. The tactical data streaming back from the planet's surface showed weapon impacts that should have been lethal, failing to stop demon attacks, while the environmental readings indicated reality distortions that made accurate targeting nearly impossible. The psychological impact on the Blood Angel's forces began manifesting even before they fully understood the nature of their enemies. The Space Marines who had fought alongside the Legion's librarians during previous campaigns recognized the signs of warp corruption, but the scale and intensity of the demonic presence in the Signus system exceeded anything they had encountered during the Great Crusade. The realization that they faced enemies spawned from humanity's darkest nightmares, rather than simple xenos opponents, created a sense of existential dread that their conditioning had not prepared them to handle. The reports filtering back to Sanguinius from multiple reconnaissance teams painted a picture of systematic corruption that extended far beyond simple military occupation. The demon forces showed clear evidence of coordination and strategic planning, suggesting that their presence in the system represented a deliberate trap rather than opportunistic invasion. The Primarch's enhanced intellect began recognizing patterns in the demon deployments that indicated intimate knowledge of Blood Angel's tactical preferences and psychological vulnerabilities. The discovery of corrupted Imperial equipment on several worlds provided the most damning evidence of the trap's true nature. The weapons and vehicles bore the markings of Imperial Guard regiments that had supposedly been defending the system, but their modification with demon-touched components suggested willing collaboration rather than simple capture and conversion. The implications struck at the heart of the Blood Angel's faith in Imperial unity, forcing them to confront the possibility that some of their former allies had willingly embraced corruption. Captain Raldoron's analysis of the tactical situation revealed the sophisticated nature of the enemies they faced. The demon forces had prepared defensive positions that took advantage of the Blood Angel's preferred assault tactics, creating killing zones where the Legion's mobility advantages became liabilities. The corruption affecting each world followed patterns that seemed designed to trigger specific psychological responses among Space Marines, suggesting that their enemies possessed detailed knowledge of Astartes' combat psychology and genetic predispositions. The first reports of Space Marines succumbing to the Red Thirst reached Sanguinius as his forces continued their reconnaissance of the system's outer worlds. The affected warriors displayed the characteristic signs of the genetic flaw that plagued all Blood Angels, but the intensity and rapid onset suggested that the demon presence was actively triggering the condition rather than simply creating stressful combat situations. The Primarch realized that his enemies understood the Legion's greatest weakness and had designed their trap to exploit it systematically. The isolation of the Blood Angels' fleet became apparent as their attempts to communicate with other Imperial forces met with complete failure. The warp storms surrounding the system had intensified since their arrival, creating psychic interference that made astropathic communication impossible while simultaneously preventing any ships from entering or leaving the system. The trap had closed around them with mechanical precision, leaving no avenue for retreat or reinforcement. Sanguinius stood on the Red Tier's observation deck, his perfect features reflecting the weight of command as he contemplated the choice before him. The evidence clearly indicated that the Signus system represented a trap designed specifically for his legion, but the possibility remained that Imperial citizens still survived on the corrupted worlds and needed rescue. His enhanced senses detected the subtle changes affecting his own gene sons as they struggled to process the reality of fighting demon enemies, their psychological conditioning strained by encounters with foes that challenged their fundamental understanding of warfare and reality. The massive structure that dominated the ruins of Signus Prime's capital defied every principle of Imperial architecture and engineering that the Blood Angels had encountered during their centuries of warfare. Rising from the twisted remains of what had once been the planetary governor's palace, the Cathedral of the Mark stretched nearly 3 kilometers into the blood-red sky, its impossible geometry creating optical illusions that made accurate range estimation nearly impossible. The building's exterior walls consisted of living bone that had been fused with corrupted metal, creating a surface that pulsed with visible veins carrying luminescent fluid that cast sickly shadows across the surrounding devastation. The cathedral's construction violated fundamental laws of structural engineering, with massive buttresses that curved in directions that should have caused immediate collapse, while supporting spires that twisted through dimensions that existed beyond normal 3-dimensional space. The building's foundation extended deep into the planet's crust, but seismic readings suggested that the structure's roots reached far deeper than any conventional construction could achieve, possibly connecting with the warp itself through dimensional fissures that had been torn in reality's fabric. Brother Captain Erasmus Tycho led the initial reconnaissance of the cathedral's exterior, his tactical squad moving through the rubble-strewn approaches while maintaining constant vigilance for demon ambushes. The Space Marines' enhanced vision struggled to process the building's shifting architecture, as portions of the structure seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously. Windows that appeared solid from one angle became gaping voids when viewed from different positions, while doorways that seemed to lead into the building's interior actually opened onto sections of wall when approached directly. The psychic emanations radiating from the cathedral created a constant pressure against the minds of any Imperial forces that approached the structure. The Blood Angels librarians reported sensing layer upon layer of warp energy that had been woven into the building's very foundation, creating a nexus of corruption that amplified the demon presence throughout the entire system. The structure served as both a fortress and a ritual focus, its design incorporating elements that strengthened the barriers between the material universe and the realm of chaos, while simultaneously providing defensive positions for the demon armies garrisoned within. Ka'Bandha's presence permeated every aspect of the cathedral's corrupted architecture, the greater demon's influence transforming the building into a physical manifestation of Khorne's domain within the material universe. The Bloodthirster had claimed the structure as his primary seat of power within the Signus system, using its reality warping properties to maintain his manifestation in real space, while commanding the demon legions deployed across the 7 worlds. The cathedral's highest spire served as Ka'Bandha's personal throne room, a vast chamber where the demon prince held court among lesser entities while monitoring the progress of the trap that had been prepared for the Blood Angels. The Greater Demon's physical form represented the pinnacle of Khorne's martial perfection, standing nearly 4 meters tall with wings that stretched twice that distance when fully extended. Ka'Bandha's brass armor had been forged in the fires of the Blood God's realm, each plate inscribed with the names of champions the demon had slain across millennia of warfare. The creature's face combined bestial fury with calculating intelligence, its eyes burning with fires that reflected the hatred of 10,000 years spent in service to the Lord of Skulls. The demon's weapons defied conventional understanding of metallurgy and physics, their edges existing partially outside normal reality, while their weight shifted according to Ka'Bandha's emotional state. The Greater Demon's axe could cleave through the armor of land raiders with casual ease, while its whip crackled with energies that could bind the souls of its victims and drag them screaming into the warp. These weapons had tasted the blood of space marines from multiple legions, their demon-forged metal growing stronger with each kill, while developing an almost sentient hunger for Astartes' gene seed. Ka'Bandha's role as the architect of the Blood Angels' torment extended far beyond simple military command, encompassing a deep understanding of the Legion's psychological vulnerabilities and genetic predispositions. The Greater Demon had studied the Blood Angels for decades, analyzing their combat patterns and identifying the specific triggers that could provoke the red thirst among individual space marines. This knowledge informed every aspect of the cathedral's design, from the placement of ritual chambers to the selection of demon types that would prove most effective at corrupting the Emperor's gene sons. The ritual chambers scattered throughout the cathedral's interior served multiple functions within the overall plan to corrupt or destroy the Blood Angels' Legion. These spaces had been designed to amplify the psychic emanations that triggered the Red Thirst, using carefully positioned focusing crystals and demon-touched artifacts to create fields of influence that could affect space marines across vast distances. The chamber's walls bore inscriptions in the Dark Tongue that described the genetic flaws plaguing Sanguinius' sons, their text serving as both historical record and active spell components in the rituals being conducted within. The largest of these ritual chambers occupied the cathedral's central section, its vaulted ceiling rising nearly 200 meters above a floor that had been carved from a single piece of black stone. The chamber's walls displayed murals that depicted the Blood Angels' greatest victories, but the images had been subtly altered to emphasize the violence and bloodshed rather than the heroism and sacrifice that had originally defined these battles. The distorted artwork served as a constant reminder of the Legion's capacity for brutality, reinforcing the psychological pressure that sought to push individual space marines beyond their normal behavioral constraints. The ritual focus at the chamber's center consisted of a massive altar constructed from the bones of fallen space marines, their gene seed organs preserved within crystalline containers that pulsed with unnatural light. The altar's surface bore intricate carvings that channeled warp energy throughout the cathedral, creating a network of power that amplified Ka'Bandha's influence while providing the energy necessary to maintain the reality distortions affecting the entire system. The Greater Demon used this altar to conduct ceremonies that weakened the barriers between the material universe and the realm of chaos, allowing more powerful entities to manifest within the Signus system. The Demon Legions garrisoned within the cathedral represented a carefully selected force that had been assembled specifically to counter Blood Angels' tactical doctrines and exploit their psychological weaknesses. Bloodleader cohorts formed the backbone of the defensive force, their supernatural strength and resilience making them ideal opponents for space marines who relied on close-quarters combat superiority. These lesser demons had been arranged in formations that mimicked Imperial Guard deployment patterns, creating a familiar tactical environment that would encourage the Blood Angels to employ their preferred assault tactics. Flesh hounds prowled the cathedral's corridors and chambers, their ability to track psychic emanations making them perfect hunters for pursuing space marines who attempted to infiltrate the structure. These demon beasts possessed an intimate understanding of space marine psychology, having been bred specifically to exploit the fears and anxieties that even the Emperor's gene sons carried within their enhanced minds. The flesh hounds could sense the onset of the red thirst among individual blood angels, allowing them to target affected warriors and either eliminate them or drive them further into the genetic flaw's embrace. The demon engines deployed throughout the cathedral's defensive positions represented a fusion of chaos technology and corrupted Imperial equipment that had been captured during previous campaigns. These war machines incorporated components from destroyed space marine vehicles, their machine spirits twisted into demon entities that retained memories of their former loyalties while serving their new chaos masters. The engine's weapon systems had been modified to fire ammunition that carried warp taint, ensuring that even non-fatal wounds would introduce corruption into the victim system. Skull cannons positioned on the cathedral's battlements provided heavy weapons support for the demon garrison, their bone-constructed barrels capable of hurling explosive projectiles across vast distances with supernatural accuracy. These artillery pieces drew their ammunition from the realm of Khorne itself, each shell containing the compressed rage and violence of 1,000 battles. The cannon's targeting systems incorporated the preserved brains of former Imperial Guard artillery specialists, their knowledge of ballistics and fire control merged with demon intelligence to create weapons operators of terrifying effectiveness. The cathedral's defensive layout took full advantage of the structure's reality warping properties, creating kill zones where the normal laws of physics became unreliable while providing the demon garrison with multiple fallback positions. The building's interior featured corridors that led to different destinations depending on the intentions of those traversing them, while rooms that appeared empty could suddenly fill with demon reinforcements summoned from the warp. The defensive positions had been designed to channel attacking forces into specific areas where the ritual chamber's influence would be strongest, maximizing the psychological pressure on any blood angels who penetrated the outer defenses. The tactical deployment of demon forces throughout the cathedral reflected Ka'Bandha's understanding of blood angels' combat doctrine and his intention to corrupt rather than simply destroy the Emperor's gene sons. The Greater Demon had positioned his most powerful subordinates in locations where they would encounter Blood Angels' officers and specialists, hoping to eliminate the Legion's leadership while simultaneously demonstrating the futility of resistance against chaos. The demon deployment patterns also incorporated multiple redundancies and overlapping fields of fire, ensuring that any Imperial assault would face constant pressure from multiple directions. The cathedral's communication systems relied on psychic networks rather than conventional technology, allowing Ka'Bandha to coordinate his forces across the entire Signus system while monitoring the progress of individual engagements. These networks incorporated the tortured souls of former Imperial astropaths, their psychic abilities enhanced through demon possession, while their knowledge of Imperial communication protocols provided intelligence on Blood Angels' tactical frequencies and encryption methods. The communication system also served as a weapon broadcasting psychic static that could disrupt Space Marine coordination while transmitting subliminal messages designed to trigger the Red Thirst. The lesser demon princes that served as Ka'Bandha's lieutenants had been assigned specific roles within the cathedral's garrison, each commanding formations that reflected their particular strengths and specializations. These entities possessed centuries of combat experience against Space Marine forces, their tactical knowledge supplemented by intimate understanding of the genetic flaws that affected different legions. The demon princes had studied captured Blood Angels equipment and analyzed battle recordings from previous engagements, allowing them to develop countermeasures for the Legion's most effective weapons and tactics. The cathedral's interior architecture created a three-dimensional maze where conventional military formations became liabilities rather than assets. The building's corridors branched and merged according to patterns that defied logical analysis, while stairways that led upward could suddenly reverse direction and deposit climbers in basement levels that had not existed moments before. The spatial distortions made it impossible for attacking forces to maintain unit cohesion or establish reliable communication links, forcing individual space marines to operate independently while facing enemies that could coordinate their actions across multiple dimensions. The demon garrison's ammunition supplies drew directly from the warp, ensuring that the defenders would never face the logistical constraints that limited conventional military forces. The lesser demons could manifest additional weapons and equipment as needed, while their supernatural resilience allowed them to continue fighting even after suffering wounds that would incapacitate mortal warriors. The demon engines required no fuel or maintenance in the conventional sense, their operation sustained by the psychic energy generated by the cathedral's ritual chambers and the suffering of their victims. The cathedral's defensive preparations included multiple contingency plans that accounted for different possible approaches by Blood Angel's assault forces. Ka'Bandha had anticipated that the Legion might attempt orbital bombardment, infiltration by scout forces, or direct assault by the entire fleet, developing countermeasures for each scenario while maintaining the flexibility to adapt to unexpected tactical developments. The Greater Daemon's planning incorporated detailed analysis of Sanguinius's command style and the tactical preferences of his senior officers, allowing the demon forces to predict and counter many potential Imperial strategies. The structure's ability to regenerate damage represented one of its most formidable defensive capabilities, with destroyed sections rebuilding themselves using materials drawn from the warp and the life force of any creatures that died within the cathedral's influence. The building's living components could adapt to different types of attack, developing resistance to weapons that had proven effective in previous engagements while creating new defensive features that countered emerging Imperial tactics. This regenerative capacity made conventional siege warfare nearly impossible, as any progress made by attacking forces could be reversed within hours of their withdrawal. The first signs of widespread genetic degradation among the Blood Angels manifested during the prolonged reconnaissance operations across the demon worlds, as individual space marines began exhibiting behavioral patterns that their officers had hoped never to witness on such a scale. The psychic emanations radiating from the corrupted Signus system created a constant pressure against the mental barriers that normally contain the Legion's hereditary flaw, wearing down psychological defenses that had been carefully constructed through decades of conditioning and discipline. The demon presence seemed to understand the precise frequencies and intensities required to trigger the Red Thirst, employing this knowledge with surgical precision to target the most vulnerable members of each tactical formation. Brother Sergeant Machiavelli of the 5th Company experienced the first documented case of complete psychological breakdown during the assault on Signus Tertius, his transformation from disciplined space marine to blood-crazed berserker occurring with terrifying rapidity. The sergeant had been leading his squad through the twisted mining tunnels when they encountered a pack of flesh hounds that had been specifically positioned to exploit the confined space and limited visibility. The demon's initial attack claimed 2 of his battle brothers, their screams of agony echoing through the tunnel system, while their blood splattered across the sergeant's power armor in patterns that seemed deliberately designed to trigger his genetic predisposition. The scent of Astartes' blood, combined with the psychic pressure emanating from the demon entities, created a cascade effect within Machiavelli's enhanced nervous system, overwhelming the neurochemical suppressors that normally regulated his emotional responses. His enhanced olfactory organs detected trace pheromones and genetic markers that activated dormant pathways within his brain, pathways that had been encoded into his gene seed during the original enhancement process, but normally remained inactive throughout a Space Marine's entire service career. The sergeant's pupils dilated as his adrenal glands began producing hormones in quantities that would have killed an unenhanced human, while his enhanced muscle fibers began contracting with strength that exceeded even normal Astartes parameters. The transformation manifested first in Machiavelli's vocal responses, his tactical communications degrading from precise military terminology into growling sounds that barely resembled human speech. His squad members initially attributed the change to Vox's equipment malfunction, but their helmet displays showed his vital signs spiking far beyond normal combat parameters, while his movement patterns became increasingly erratic and aggressive. The sergeant's tactical awareness, normally enhanced by his decades of combat experience, began focusing exclusively on potential sources of blood and violence while ignoring strategic objectives and unit cohesion requirements. Brother Hadrian attempted to restore communication with his sergeant, moving closer through the tunnel system while maintaining defensive positions against the remaining flesh hounds. The Space Marine's enhanced hearing detected subtle changes in Machiavel's breathing patterns and the mechanical sounds of his power armor's servo motors, indicators that suggested his sergeant was experiencing severe physiological stress. Hadrian's training had included theoretical instruction about the Red Thirst and its manifestations, but the clinical descriptions provided by the Legion's chaplains had not prepared him for witnessing the condition's onset in a respected veteran and trusted leader. The sergeant's first attack on his own battle brothers came without warning or provocation, his chainsword activating as he turned toward Hadrian with eyes that no longer showed any recognition of brotherhood or shared loyalty. The weapon's teeth bit into Hadrian's shoulder pauldron, the ceramite armor providing minimal protection against a blade wielded with strength that exceeded normal Space Marine capabilities. Machiavel's technique remained fundamentally sound despite his psychological deterioration, his muscle memory guiding precise strikes that targeted weak points in power armor construction, while his enhanced reflexes allowed him to maintain perfect balance despite his frenzied state. The remaining squad members faced an impossible tactical situation as their sergeant continued his assault on Brother Hadrian, their training and conditioning preventing them from employing lethal force against a fellow blood angel, while their survival instincts demanded immediate action to prevent further casualties. Brother Cassius attempted to restrain Machiavel using non-lethal techniques, but the sergeant's enhanced strength made conventional submission holds ineffective, while his complete loss of pain sensitivity allowed him to ignore injuries that would have incapacitated a normal Space Marine. The flesh hounds that had initiated the encounter continued their own attacks throughout the fraternal combat, their demon intelligence recognizing the opportunity to eliminate multiple Space Marines while they remained distracted by internal conflict. The creatures coordinated their assault patterns to maximize the psychological pressure on the remaining squad members, forcing them to divide their attention between supernatural enemies and their corrupted battle brother, while maintaining defensive positions in terrain that offered minimal tactical advantages. Brother Hadrian's death occurred when Machiavel's chainsword found the gap between his helmet and gorget, the sergeant's enhanced strength driving the weapon through reinforced ceramite and into the vital organs beneath. The spray of blood that resulted from the fatal wound seemed to intensify Machiavel's condition rather than satisfy his bloodlust, his growling vocalizations becoming more animalistic as he turned toward his next target. The sergeant's power armor bore the heraldry and battle honors of dozens of campaigns, but these symbols of loyalty and service meant nothing to the creature he had become. The tactical implications of individual Space Marines succumbing to the Red Thirst extended far beyond simple casualty replacement, as affected warriors became active threats to their own units while remaining physically capable of devastating effectiveness against enemy forces. Squad leaders found themselves forced to allocate combat resources to contain or eliminate corrupted battle brothers, reducing their available firepower against demon opponents while creating psychological trauma among survivors who witnessed trusted comrades transformed into monsters. The condition's unpredictable onset made it impossible to identify potential victims in advance, forcing commanders to maintain constant vigilance against threats that could emerge from within their own ranks. Captain Metrion of the strike cruiser Angel's Wrath reported the first company-level breakdown during operations on Signus Secundus, where an entire tactical squad succumbed to the Red Thirst simultaneously after discovering the remains of Imperial Guard defenders who who had been tortured and mutilated by demon forces. The Space Marines' enhanced senses had detected the specific combination of pheromones and genetic markers present in the massacre site, triggering a cascade reaction that overwhelmed their psychological conditioning within minutes of exposure. The affected warriors turned on their supporting units with coordinated savagery that retained their tactical training while abandoning all restraint and mercy. The contamination spread through the company's ranks as unaffected Space Marines were forced to engage their corrupted battle brothers in close combat. The blood spilled during these encounters, creating additional trigger sites that affected previously stable warriors. Captain Metrion found himself commanding a progressively smaller number of reliable troops while facing enemies on multiple fronts. His tactical options constrained by the need to prevent further contamination while maintaining combat effectiveness against demon opponents who seemed to understand exactly how to exploit the Legion's genetic weakness. The psychological impact on Space Marines who witnessed their battle brothers' transformation created secondary effects that further degraded unit cohesion and combat effectiveness. Veterans who had served together for decades found themselves unable to trust comrades whose genetic stability had previously seemed absolute, their enhanced awareness of behavioral patterns making them hypersensitive to any signs of potential corruption. The constant vigilance required to monitor for red thirst symptoms exhausted mental resources that should have been focused on tactical analysis and enemy engagement, creating a degradation spiral that affected entire formations. Chaplain Erebus of the 3rd Company implemented emergency protocols designed to contain the spreading corruption, establishing isolation procedures for affected Space Marines while conducting psychological evaluations of potentially compromised personnel. The chaplain's training included extensive study of the Red Thirst and its manifestations, but the scale and intensity of the outbreak in the Signus system exceeded anything documented in the Legion's historical records. The demon influence seemed to accelerate the condition's progression while making traditional containment methods ineffective, forcing Erebus to develop new approaches based on battlefield improvisation rather than established doctrine. The chaplain's attempts to maintain unit discipline through increased surveillance and psychological conditioning created additional stress among unaffected Space Marines, who began viewing their spiritual leaders with suspicion and resentment. The enhanced monitoring procedures required battle brothers to report on each other's behavior and emotional states, breaking down the bonds of trust and mutual support that formed the foundation of Space Marine unit cohesion. Erebus found himself caught between the necessity of preventing further corruption and the need to maintain the psychological foundations that made his warriors effective in combat. Sanguinius experienced the full weight of his gene sons, suffering through the psychic bonds that connected him to every member of his legion. The Primarch's enhanced empathic abilities, allowing him to sense each instance of corruption and transformation as it occurred across the scattered battle zones. The Angel's perfect features showed the strain of maintaining his own psychological equilibrium while simultaneously fighting to preserve the sanity and loyalty of his warriors, his wings rustling with unconscious agitation as reports of new casualties reached the Red Tier's command center. The Primarch's attempts to provide psychic support to his afflicted gene sons created additional risks, as his direct mental contact with corrupted Space Marines exposed him to the same demon influences that had triggered their transformation. Sanguinius possessed the mental discipline and psychic strength necessary to resist these influences, but the constant effort required to maintain his defenses while supporting his legion began taking a visible toll on his physical and emotional condition. The Angel's advisors noted changes in his behavior patterns and decision-making processes that suggested the demon corruption was affecting even their genetically perfect leader. The tactical doctrine modifications implemented by Blood Angel's commanders in response to the Red Thirst outbreak reflected the desperate nature of their situation and the fundamental challenge of maintaining military effectiveness while combating enemies within their own ranks. Squad leaders began deploying their forces in smaller, more isolated formations that could be contained more easily if corruption occurred, but this approach reduced their collective firepower and made them more vulnerable to demon attacks. The modified tactics also required constant communication between units to coordinate support and monitor for signs of genetic breakdown, creating additional burdens on already strained command networks. Captain Raldoron of the First Company developed new engagement protocols that incorporated specific procedures for dealing with corrupted battle brothers, including predetermined signals for requesting assistance and established rules of engagement that balance the need for swift action against the psychological trauma of killing fellow Space Marines. The protocols required extensive training and psychological preparation, but the rapidly evolving tactical situation made it impossible to implement comprehensive retraining programs while maintaining combat operations against demon forces. The weapons modifications authorized by the Legion's Tech Marines reflected the unique challenges posed by fighting corrupted Space Marines who retain their enhanced durability and combat training while abandoning tactical restraint. Standard bolter ammunition proved insufficient for reliably stopping affected warriors, forcing the adoption of specialized rounds designed to penetrate power armor while delivering maximum stopping power. The modified ammunition created additional logistical challenges as supply lines struggled to meet demand for specialized ordnance while maintaining stocks of conventional weapons for use against demon opponents. The medical protocols developed by the Legion's apothecaries for treating red thirst victims proved largely ineffective against the demon-enhanced version of the condition, as traditional neurochemical suppressors and psychological conditioning techniques failed to counteract the warp-based influences affecting corrupted Space Marines. Chief Apothecary Miros conducted extensive research into potential treatments and preventive measures, but the limited time available and the ongoing combat operations made controlled experimentation nearly impossible. The gene seed recovery operations conducted by apothecary teams created additional complications as they attempted to salvage the genetic material from fallen Space Marines while determining whether corruption had affected the precious organs. The standard extraction procedures required modification to account for the possibility of warp taint, while the testing protocols needed enhancement to detect subtle forms of corruption that might not manifest immediately. The uncertainty surrounding gene seed viability created strategic concerns about the Legion's long-term recruitment and replacement capabilities. The psychological support systems established by the Legion's chaplains and librarians struggled to address the scale and complexity of the trauma experienced by Space Marines who had witnessed or participated in combat against their own battle brothers. The traditional methods of spiritual counseling and mental conditioning proved inadequate for processing experiences that challenged fundamental assumptions about loyalty, brotherhood, and the nature of their genetic heritage. The support personnel found themselves dealing with psychological wounds that had no precedent in Imperial military medicine. The command structure modifications implemented throughout the Blood Angels fleet reflected the practical necessities of maintaining operational effectiveness while dealing with an unpredictable internal threat. Officers began implementing buddy system protocols that paired Space Marines with different genetic vulnerabilities, hoping to create mutual monitoring relationships that could provide early warning of corruption onset. The system required careful psychological matching to ensure compatibility while avoiding the creation of dependencies that might compromise combat effectiveness. The intelligence gathering operations conducted by Blood Angels reconnaissance elements revealed the systematic nature of the demon force's psychological warfare campaign, with evidence suggesting that the corruption triggers had been specifically designed to exploit known genetic weaknesses within the Legion. The demon deployment patterns showed clear understanding of Blood Angels' tactical doctrines and unit organization, indicating that their enemies possessed detailed intelligence about the Legion's internal structure and operational procedures. The tactical adaptations developed by demon forces in response to Blood Angels' countermeasures demonstrated their ability to learn and evolve their corruption techniques based on observed results. The greater demons commanding the enemy forces adjusted their psychological warfare tactics to account for the Legion's defensive measures, creating new trigger mechanisms that bypassed established containment protocols while maintaining the effectiveness of their corruption campaigns. The confrontation between Sanguinius and Ka'Bandha began not with the clash of weapons, but with a moment of terrible recognition that stretched across the twisted spires of the Cathedral of the Mark. The Angel of Baal stood at the threshold of the demon's throne room, his perfect features illuminated by the hellish glow emanating from the ritual fires that burned throughout the corrupted structure. His golden armor bore the scars of the fighting that had brought him to this moment, ceramite plates cracked and blackened from demon weapons, while his white wings showed tears from the claws of lesser entities that had dared to challenge his passage through the cathedral's nightmare corridors. Ka'Bandha rose from his throne of fused skulls and brass, the greater demon's massive form casting shadows that seemed to writhe with independent malevolence across the chamber's bone-carved walls. The bloodthirster's presence filled the vast space with an aura of barely contained violence that made the air itself seem to thicken with anticipation. His brass armor reflected the fires of Khorne's realm, each plate inscribed with the names of champions whose skulls now adorned his trophy racks, while his weapons pulsed with energies that existed partially outside the normal flow of reality. The demon's voice resonated through dimensions that human ears were never meant to perceive, its words bypassing the primarch's enhanced hearing to speak directly to the primal centers of his brain. Ka'Bandha's greeting carried the weight of prophecy and the promise of destiny fulfilled, his ancient intelligence recognizing the significance of this moment within the broader tapestry of the Horus heresy. The greater demon had waited millennia for the opportunity to face one of the Emperor's gene-forged sons in single combat, and the careful orchestration of the Signus trap had delivered the most magnificent prize of all. Sanguinius felt the demon's psychic presence pressing against his consciousness like a physical weight, the creature's malevolent intelligence probing for weaknesses in his mental defenses, while simultaneously broadcasting waves of rage and bloodlust that would have driven lesser beings instantly insane. The Primarch's own psychic abilities allowed him to perceive the true scope of Ka'Bandha's power, recognizing the demon as an entity whose existence spanned the entire history of human civilization, and whose knowledge of warfare had been accumulated across countless battlefields throughout the galaxy. The Angel's enhanced senses detected the subtle reality distortions that surrounded the greater demon, space-time itself bending in response to the creature's presence, while the normal laws of physics became suggestions rather than absolute constraints. The chamber's dimensions seemed to shift and flow according to Ka'Bandha's emotional state, walls expanding and contracting, while the ceiling stretched toward infinity or pressed down with crushing weight depending on the demon's whims. The Primarch understood that this battle would be fought not only with blade and bolt, but across multiple planes of existence simultaneously. Ka'Bandha's opening assault came without warning or ceremony, the demon's massive form covering the distance between throne and doorway in a single bound that defied the chamber's apparent size. The Bloodthirster's axe swept through the air with speed that created sonic booms, its demon-forged edge trailing fire and shadow, while reality itself seemed to part before the weapon's passage. The attack carried the accumulated fury of 10,000 years spent in service to the Blood God, each swing powered by the screams of countless victims and the rage of battles fought across a dozen different dimensions. Sanguinius met the demon's charge with his own supernatural speed, the Primarch's enhanced reflexes allowing him to twist aside from the axe's path while simultaneously drawing the blade in carmine in a motion too fast for normal eyes to follow. The sword's ancient metal sang as it cut through the air, its edge wreathed in golden fire that represented the Emperor's own power, channeled through his gene-forged son. The weapon had been crafted specifically for the Angel's use, its balance and weight perfectly matched to his fighting style, while its spiritual significance made it particularly effective against entities spawned from the warp. The first exchange of blows created shockwaves that shattered the chamber's windows and sent cracks racing through the bone-constructed walls, the collision of divine and demonic energies releasing forces that existed beyond the normal electromagnetic spectrum. Ka'Bandha's axe met the blade in carmine in a shower of sparks that burned with colors that had no names in human language, each impact generating harmonics that resonated through the warp itself. The demon's strength exceeded even primarch parameters, but Sanguinius compensated through superior technique and the righteous fury that burned within his perfect soul. The Greater Demon's fighting style reflected millennia of experience against every conceivable type of opponent, from the star gods of the ancient Necron tier to the psychic titans of the Eldar at their height. Ka'Bandha's attacks flowed seamlessly between different combat forms, incorporating techniques that had been developed across countless worlds and refined through eternal warfare in the realm of chaos. The demon's axe work demonstrated perfect understanding of leverage and momentum, each swing designed to maximize destructive force while creating openings for follow-up attacks with his whip or claws. Sanguinius responded with combat techniques that represented the pinnacle of Imperial martial arts, his movements combining the disciplined precision of Terran sword schools with innovations developed during the Great Crusade's countless battles. The Primarch's enhanced physiology allowed him to execute maneuvers that would have been impossible for even the most skilled space marine, his perfect balance and coordination enabling him to fight effectively while airborne or in the confined spaces created by the chamber's shifting geometry. His wings provided additional tactical options, allowing him to change direction mid-flight or create sudden bursts of speed that caught even the demon off guard. The supernatural nature of both combatants transformed the duel into a battle that transcended normal physical limitations, with attacks that existed partially in the warp while their effects manifested in real space. Ka'Bandha's whip crackled with energies that could bind souls and drag them screaming into the realm of chaos, while the blade in Carmine's edge carried the Emperor's own blessing and could wound entities that existed purely as psychic constructs. The weapon's interaction created feedback loops that affected reality itself, causing temporal distortions and spatial anomalies throughout the cathedral's upper levels. The demon's tactical approach reflected his understanding of Sanguinius's psychological makeup and the genetic flaws that affected all blood angels. Ka'Bandha deliberately targeted areas of the Primarch's body that would produce maximum blood flow, hoping to trigger the red thirst that plagued the angel's gene sons, while simultaneously weakening his opponent through blood loss. The Greater Demon's attacks incorporated specific movement patterns and vocal emanations designed to activate the primal hunting instincts encoded within Sanguinius's genetic structure, seeking to transform the noble Primarch into a blood-crazed berserker who could be more easily defeated. Sanguinius recognized the demon's psychological warfare tactics and adapted his own fighting style to counter them, maintaining strict mental discipline while channeling his rage into precise tactical applications rather than allowing it to overwhelm his strategic thinking. The Primarch's enhanced intellect allowed him to analyze Ka'Bandha's attack patterns in real time, identifying weaknesses in the demon's defense while developing countermeasures for the creature's most dangerous techniques. His psychic abilities provided additional advantages, allowing him to anticipate attacks before they were fully committed while disrupting the demon's own supernatural senses. The battle's intensity escalated as both combatants began employing their most devastating abilities, the chamber's architecture warping and reshaping itself in response to the energies being unleashed. Ka'Bandha's rage began affecting the physical laws governing the immediate area, gravity fluctuating wildly, while temperature variations created localized weather patterns that included everything from Arctic cold to volcanic heat. The demon's presence strengthened the connection between the cathedral and the warp, allowing him to draw upon reserves of power that existed beyond normal dimensional boundaries. The Greater Demon's axe began leaving trails of fire that persisted long after the weapon had passed, creating a web of burning energy that restricted Sanguinius's movement options, while providing Ka'Bandha with additional tactical advantages. The demon's whip extended far beyond its apparent physical length, its reach limited only by the chamber's dimensions, while its touch could inflict wounds that existed on multiple planes simultaneously. The weapon's ability to phase partially out of reality made it nearly impossible to block or parry, using conventional techniques. Sanguinius countered the demon's reality, warping abilities through his own connection to the warp, the Primarch's psychic powers allowing him to stabilize local space-time while maintaining the physical laws necessary for effective combat. The Angel's presence created a zone of relative stability within the chaos of the chamber, his divine nature serving as an anchor point that prevented the demon from completely reshaping the battlefield to his advantage. The blade in Carmine's edge began glowing with increasing intensity as it channeled more of the Emperor's power, its strikes leaving wounds that Ka'Bandha's supernatural regeneration could not immediately heal. The demon's tactical analysis of his opponent revealed the fundamental challenge posed by fighting a being who combined physical perfection with unwavering moral conviction. Ka'Bandha's experience with other Primarchs had taught him that each of the Emperor's sons possessed unique weaknesses that could be exploited through careful psychological manipulation, but Sanguinius presented a more complex target whose nobility and self-sacrifice made traditional corruption techniques ineffective. The Greater Demon was forced to rely primarily on brute force and superior experience rather than the subtle psychological warfare that had proven effective against other Imperial champions. The battle's progression revealed the true scope of both combatants' abilities as they abandoned restraint and began fighting with the full fury of their respective natures. Ka'Bandha's attacks began incorporating elements drawn directly from the warp, his weapons manifesting properties that changed from moment to moment, while his physical form began shifting between different configurations optimized for specific combat roles. The demon's brass armor flowed like liquid metal, redistributing mass and thickness to provide maximum protection against Sanguinius's attacks while maintaining the mobility necessary for effective offense. Sanguinius responded by allowing more of his divine nature to manifest through his physical form, the Primarch's golden armor beginning to radiate light that pushed back the shadows while his wings spread to their full extent and began generating winds that cleared the air of demon taint. The Angel's movements became increasingly fluid and graceful, his combat techniques transcending mere martial skill to become expressions of perfect harmony between body, mind, and spirit. His attacks carried the weight of absolute conviction, each strike representing not just physical force, but the concentrated will of humanity's greatest defender. The climactic moment of the duel arrived when Ka'Bandha's whip found its mark, the demon weapon wrapping around Sanguinius's ankle and sending psychic feedback through the Primarch's nervous system that would have killed any lesser being instantly. The Greater Demon's triumph lasted only seconds before the Angel's response demonstrated why he was considered the greatest warrior among the Emperor's sons. Sanguinius used the whip's connection to channel his own psychic power directly into Ka'Bandha's essence, the feedback creating a resonance cascade that disrupted the demon's connection to the warp while simultaneously strengthening the Primarch's own abilities. The reversal caught Ka'Bandha completely off guard, the demon's millennia of experience providing no preparation for an opponent who could turn his own weapons against him through pure force of will. The Greater Demon's form began to destabilize as the psychic feedback interfered with the complex energy patterns that maintained his manifestation in real space, his brass armor flickering between solid matter and warp stuff, while his weapons lost their supernatural properties. The demon's roar of rage and frustration shook the entire cathedral, but his power was already beginning to fade as the connection to his patron deity weakened. Sanguinius pressed his advantage with the ruthless efficiency that had made him legendary among the Primarchs, the blade and Carmine's edge finding gaps in Ka'Bandha's failing defenses, while the Angel's wings provided the leverage necessary to deliver strikes with maximum force. The demon's supernatural resilience allowed him to survive wounds that would have destroyed lesser entities, but each successful attack weakened his hold on reality while strengthening the barriers that separated the material universe from the realm of chaos. The battle's outcome became inevitable as the Primarch's divine nature began overwhelming the demon's connection to the warp. The final exchange saw Ka'Bandha making a desperate attempt to drag Sanguinius into the warp with him, the demon's failing form opening rifts in reality that led directly to Khorne's realm. The Greater Demon's plan required him to maintain physical contact with the primarch long enough for the dimensional barriers to collapse completely, but Sanguinius recognized the tactic and countered with a technique that demonstrated the full scope of his psychic abilities. The angel's mind reached out across multiple dimensions simultaneously, reinforcing the barriers between real space and the warp, while simultaneously severing Ka'Bandha's connection to his source of power. The demon's defeat manifested as a gradual dissolution rather than a dramatic destruction, Ka'Bandha's form becoming increasingly translucent as his essence was drawn back into the warp against his will. The greater demon's final words carried the weight of prophecy and the promise of future vengeance, his ancient intelligence recognizing that this defeat represented only a temporary setback in a conflict that would span millennia. The demon's knowledge of future events allowed him to perceive the role that Sanguinius would play in the coming siege of Terra, and his parting curse carried implications that would haunt the angel for the remainder of his existence. The cathedral's structure began collapsing as Ka'Bandha's banishment disrupted the reality warping effects that had maintained the building's impossible architecture. The demon's defeat created a cascade failure throughout the ritual networks that connected the various corrupted worlds, weakening the barriers that had isolated the Signus system, while simultaneously reducing the psychic pressure that had been triggering the red thirst among the blood angels. The victory came at a terrible cost, as Sanguinius had been forced to draw upon reserves of power that left him physically and spiritually drained, while the battle's psychic feedback had inflicted wounds that would never fully heal. The symbolic importance of the duel extended far beyond its immediate tactical implications, representing the first major victory achieved by loyalist forces against the demon entities that served the traitor cause. Sanguinius's triumph demonstrated that the Emperor's gene-forged sons possessed the power necessary to stand against the forces of chaos, but it also revealed the terrible price that such victories would demand. The angel's injuries served as a reminder that even the primarchs were not invulnerable, while the knowledge gained during the battle provided crucial intelligence about the supernatural threats that the Imperium would face in the coming conflict. The aftermath of Ka'Bandha's defeat saw the immediate withdrawal of lesser demon forces throughout the Signus system, their connection to the material universe weakened by the loss of their most powerful leader. The corrupted worlds began reverting to more stable configurations as the reality warping effects that had transformed them gradually dissipated, though the scars left by the demon presence would remain visible for millennia to come. The psychic storms that had isolated the system began to weaken, allowing the Blood Angels to re-establish communication with other Imperial forces while preparing for their eventual departure from the nightmare realm they had endured. The silence that followed Ka'Bandha's banishment carried a weight that pressed against the minds of every surviving Blood Angel throughout the Signus system. The demon's defeat had shattered the psychic networks that coordinated the corruption across 7 worlds, but the sudden absence of supernatural pressure revealed the true scope of devastation that had been inflicted upon the 9th Legion. Captain Raldoron stood among the twisted wreckage of the Cathedral of the Mark, his enhanced senses cataloging the casualties that littered the bone-strewn floors, while his tactical display showed force strength indicators that made his gene-enhanced heart clench with grief. The numerical losses alone staggered comprehension for a legion that had prided itself on operational efficiency and minimal casualties during the Great Crusade. Of the approximately 25,000 Blood Angels who had entered the Signus system, fewer than 19,000 remained combat effective when the final tally was completed weeks later. The dead included not merely rank and file battle brothers, but veteran sergeants whose experience spanned decades of warfare, company champions whose martial prowess had become legendary within the Legion, and librarians whose psychic abilities had been crucial for maintaining communication and coordination during the Nightmare Campaign. Brother Captain Erasmus Tycho had fallen during the assault on Signus Tertius, his body found in a mining tunnel surrounded by the corpses of 17 lesser demons, his chainsword still clutched in hands that had been fused to the weapon's grip by demon fire. The captain's death left the 3rd Company without experienced leadership at a critical moment when the survivors needed guidance to process the psychological trauma they had endured. His replacement, Captain Sendini, possessed tactical competence, but lacked the personal relationships and institutional knowledge that Tycho had accumulated through 40 years of service with the Legion. Captain Machiavelli of the Fifth Company had been lost to the Red Thirst itself, his transformation into a blood-crazed berserker, forcing his own men to cut him down in the depths of Signus Secundus after he had killed 3 battle brothers in his madness. The necessity of executing their own commander created wounds in the company's collective psyche that would never fully heal, as the survivors struggled to reconcile their loyalty to a respected leader with the horror of witnessing his complete psychological breakdown. The incident became a cautionary tale that spread throughout the Legion, reinforcing fears about the genetic curse that lurked within every Blood Angel's enhanced biology. The Sanguinary Guard had suffered disproportionate casualties during their efforts to protect Sanguinius throughout the campaign, with 8 of the elite warriors falling to demon weapons while defending their primarch's approach to the Cathedral of the Mark. These losses struck particularly deep because each Sanguinary Guard represented years of careful selection and training, their deaths removing irreplaceable expertise from the Legion's most elite formation. Captain Askelon found himself commanding a unit that had been reduced to barely half strength, forcing him to implement emergency recruitment protocols that promoted promising battle brothers before they had completed the traditional qualification requirements. Chief Librarian Miros had survived the campaign but bore psychic scars that would affect his abilities for years to come. The senior psyker had been forced to maintain mental contact with corrupted battle brothers during their transformation, experiencing their descent into madness through the psychic bonds that connected all members of the Legion. The trauma of witnessing dozens of Gene brothers succumb to the Red Thirst had created permanent damage to his psychic architecture, reducing his ability to provide the spiritual guidance that the Legion desperately needed during its recovery period. The chaplains who had served as the Legion's spiritual backbone found themselves overwhelmed by the scale of psychological damage that required attention among the survivors. Brother Chaplain Erebus had documented over 400 cases of severe combat stress among Space Marines who had previously shown no signs of psychological instability, while another 200 warriors displayed symptoms that suggested partial corruption by demon influence. The traditional methods of spiritual counseling and mental conditioning proved inadequate for addressing trauma that involved witnessing the transformation of trusted comrades into monsters, forcing the chaplains to develop new therapeutic approaches without established precedents or institutional support. The apothecaries faced equally daunting challenges in treating physical wounds that had been inflicted by demon weapons, as the supernatural energies involved created injuries that resisted conventional medical intervention. Chief Apothecary Corbulo had lost 3 members of his staff to demon taint contracted while treating wounded battle brothers, their gene seed organs becoming corrupted beyond recovery despite all efforts at purification. The medical corps found themselves dealing with wound patterns that defied understanding, including injuries that continued to deteriorate despite successful surgical intervention and phantom pains that affected limbs that had been successfully reattached. The gene seed recovery operations had yielded particularly disturbing results, with nearly 15% of harvested organs showing signs of corruption that made them unsuitable for implantation into new recruits. The progenitor glands that served as the foundation for creating new Space Marines had been affected by exposure to warp energies in ways that the Legion's genetic specialists could not fully comprehend. Some organs showed obvious signs of mutation or demon taint, but others appeared normal until subjected to detailed analysis that revealed subtle alterations in their genetic structure that could potentially affect future generations of Blood Angels. The psychological impact of these discoveries extended far beyond immediate tactical concerns, as the corruption of gene seed represented an attack on the Legion's fundamental identity and future viability. The Blood Angels had always taken pride in the purity of their genetic heritage, viewing themselves as living embodiments of Sanguinius's perfection, despite the presence of the Red Thirst and Black Rage within their bloodline. The revelation that demon influence could corrupt the very essence of their genetic legacy created existential fears that affected every level of the Legion's hierarchy. The survivors who had witnessed the full horror of their battle brothers' transformations carried psychological burdens that manifested in ways that challenged traditional understanding of Space Marine mental conditioning. Veterans who had previously shown exemplary discipline began experiencing nightmares that disrupted their sleep cycles, while others developed hypervigilance that made them react to normal sounds and movements as potential threats. The enhanced memory capabilities that normally served as tactical advantages became liabilities as affected warriors found themselves unable to forget the details of traumatic encounters with corrupted comrades. Brother Sergeant Castor of the 7th Company had been present when his squad leader succumbed to the Red Thirst, and the experience had fundamentally altered his approach to leadership and unit cohesion. The sergeant found himself constantly monitoring his subordinates for signs of genetic instability, his enhanced senses detecting subtle changes in breathing patterns, hormone levels, and behavioral indicators that might suggest impending corruption. This hypervigilance created a command style that emphasized control and surveillance over the trust and brotherhood that had traditionally characterized Blood Angel's leadership, generating resentment among his battle brothers while failing to provide the security he desperately sought. The tactical doctrine modifications implemented during the Signus Campaign had proven effective against demon opponents, but their adoption created long-term changes in the Legion's operational philosophy that would affect their performance in conventional warfare. The emphasis on smaller unit deployments and enhanced monitoring procedures reduced the tactical flexibility that had made the Blood Angels so effective during the Great Crusade, while the psychological screening requirements created administrative burdens that slowed deployment times and reduced overall operational efficiency. The weapons and equipment losses sustained during the campaign created logistical challenges that would affect the Legion's combat capabilities for months to come. The demon-touched environments of the Signus worlds had corrupted or destroyed vast quantities of ammunition, vehicles, and specialized equipment that could not be easily replaced given the Imperium's current state of civil war. The strike cruiser Angel's Wrath had suffered such extensive damage to its weapon systems and life support infrastructure that it required complete refit at a major shipyard facility, effectively removing the vessel from active service for the foreseeable future. The communication equipment that had been exposed to demon influence required complete replacement rather than simple repair, as the machine spirits governing these systems had been affected by warp taint in ways that made them unreliable and potentially dangerous. Several Vox operators had reported receiving transmissions in languages that predated human civilization, while auger arrays began displaying sensor readings that showed non-existent targets or failed to detect actual threats. The technical specialists responsible for maintaining this equipment found themselves working with tools and techniques that had been developed for dealing with conventional mechanical failures rather than supernatural corruption. The fleet's navigators had suffered particularly severe psychological trauma during their efforts to guide the Blood Angels through the warp storms surrounding the Signus system, with 2 members of the navigator houses permanently losing their ability to perceive the Astronomicon due to exposure to demon-influenced warp currents. The remaining navigators reported persistent visual distortions and temporal displacement effects that made accurate warp travel extremely difficult, forcing the Legion to rely on longer and more circuitous routes that increased travel times while reducing their strategic mobility. The Black Rage, which had previously affected only a small percentage of Blood Angels during their most stressful combat operations, began manifesting with increased frequency among survivors of the Signus Campaign. The genetic flaw that caused affected warriors to experience the memories and emotions of Sanguinius during his final battle seemed to have been triggered by exposure to the intense psychic trauma of fighting demon opponents. The condition's onset followed no predictable pattern, with some veterans succumbing months after the campaign's conclusion, while others who had experienced more severe trauma remained unaffected. Brother Lemarts of the 6th Company had shown no signs of genetic instability during the Signus fighting, but began experiencing episodes of the Black Rage during routine training exercises conducted weeks after the Legion's departure from the corrupted system. The warrior's transformation from disciplined Space Marine to rage-consumed berserker occurred with terrifying suddenness, his enhanced physiology allowing him to inflict significant casualties among his training partners before containment protocols could be implemented. The incident forced the Legion's medical staff to develop new screening procedures for identifying potential Black Rage victims before their condition became dangerous to their comrades. The increased frequency of Black Rage manifestations created tactical challenges that affected the Legion's deployment capabilities and operational planning. Company commanders found themselves forced to maintain larger reserves to account for warriors who might suddenly become unavailable due to genetic breakdown, while the need for specialized containment facilities reduced the amount of space available for normal equipment and personnel. The psychological impact on unaffected battle brothers created additional stress that potentially increased their own vulnerability to the genetic curse, establishing a feedback loop that threatened to accelerate the conditions spread throughout the Legion. The strategic implications of the Blood Angels' weakened state became apparent as reports reached them of major engagements occurring throughout the galaxy, while they struggled to recover from their ordeal in the Signus system. The Ultramarines had suffered devastating losses at Calth. The Dark Angels were engaged in a grinding campaign against traitor forces in the Thramas sector, and the Imperial Fists were fortifying Terra against the inevitable assault by Horus's forces. The Blood Angels found themselves unable to provide meaningful assistance to their fellow loyalists due to their reduced numbers and the psychological trauma affecting their survivors. The Legion's reduced combat effectiveness became evident during their first engagement after leaving the Signus system, when they encountered a small traitor fleet that should have been easily defeated by a force of their size and experience. The Blood Angels' tactical coordination suffered from the loss of experienced officers and the psychological damage affecting their survivors, while their reduced numbers made it impossible to implement the aggressive assault tactics that had previously defined their combat doctrine. The engagement resulted in a tactical victory, but the casualties sustained and the time required to achieve success demonstrated that the Legion would require extensive rebuilding before it could return to full operational status. The recruitment challenges facing the Legion extended beyond simple numerical replacement, as the corruption of gene seed stocks made it impossible to maintain previous expansion rates while ensuring genetic purity. The screening procedures developed to identify potentially corrupted genetic material created bottlenecks in the recruitment process, while the psychological evaluation requirements for new recruits added additional complexity to selection procedures that had previously focused primarily on physical compatibility and basic aptitude testing. The training modifications implemented to prepare new recruits for the psychological challenges they might face in combat against demon opponents created additional burdens on an already strained instructional staff. The traditional Blood Angels training regimen had emphasized physical conditioning, weapons proficiency, and tactical coordination, but the Signus experience demonstrated the need for enhanced psychological preparation and spiritual fortification. The development of new curricula required expertise that the Legion's surviving personnel could barely provide, while simultaneously fulfilling their operational commitments. The morale problems affecting the Legion's survivors created leadership challenges that extended throughout the command structure, as officers struggled to maintain unit cohesion while dealing with their own psychological trauma. The traditional bonds of brotherhood and shared purpose that had sustained the Blood Angels through the challenges of the Great Crusade had been strained by experiences that challenged fundamental assumptions about loyalty, genetic heritage, and the nature of their enemies. The rebuilding process would require not only numerical replacement and equipment resupply, but a complete reconstruction of the spiritual and psychological foundations that had made the Legion effective. The gradual dissipation of the warp storms surrounding the Signus system began 3 days after Ka'Bandha's banishment, manifesting first as subtle changes in the psychic pressure that had isolated the Blood Angels' fleet from the broader galaxy. Navigator Yale Voss aboard the Red Tier reported fluctuations in the local warp currents that suggested the supernatural barriers were weakening, though the patterns remained chaotic and unpredictable. The storms that had raged with unnatural fury for months showed signs of losing coherence as the demon networks that sustained them collapsed in the wake of their primary coordinator's defeat. Sanguinius stood on the command bridge, his enhanced senses detecting the subtle shifts in reality that accompanied the storm's decline. The primarch's psychic abilities allowed him to perceive the gradual restoration of natural warp flow patterns, though the process remained dangerously unstable. The angel's wings bore fresh scars from his confrontation with Ka'Bandha, the demon's whip having left marks that would never fully heal, while his perfect features showed the strain of maintaining command authority despite the physical and spiritual exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm him. Captain Raldoron coordinated the fleet's preparation for departure, his tactical displays showing the scattered positions of Blood Angels' forces across the 7 corrupted worlds. The first captain's enhanced memory cataloged every unit that required extraction, from isolated reconnaissance squads to the heavy assault companies that had been fighting continuous engagements against demon forces for weeks. The logistical complexity of coordinating a fighting withdrawal while maintaining defensive positions against enemies that could manifest without warning tested every aspect of Blood Angel's operational doctrine. The strike cruiser Blade of Vengeance had suffered catastrophic damage to its warp drive during the final assault on Cygnus Prime, leaving Captain Donatos with a vessel that could maintain position in real space, but lacked the capability for independent warp travel. The ship's techmarines worked desperately to implement emergency repairs, using components salvaged from destroyed demon engines, their efforts complicated by the corrupted nature of the available materials. The machine spirits governing the vessel's critical systems showed signs of instability that suggested exposure to warp taint, requiring constant monitoring and manual override procedures to prevent complete system failure. The evacuation of ground forces from the demon worlds presented unprecedented challenges as the corrupted environments continued to affect Imperial equipment and personnel even after the primary demon presence had been eliminated. The drop ships and Thunderhawk gunships tasked with extraction duties reported persistent mechanical failures and navigation anomalies that made precision flying nearly impossible. Pilot Sergeant Cassil's squadron lost 2 aircraft to sudden gravitational fluctuations that crushed their hulls like empty cans, the atmospheric distortions creating flight conditions that defied conventional aerodynamic principles. Brother Captain Sendini of the 3rd Company led the rearguard action on Signus Tertius, his reduced forces holding defensive positions around the primary extraction point, while demon stragglers continued to emerge from the deeper mining tunnels. The captain's tactical doctrine emphasized mobility and concentrated firepower, using the terrain's natural choke points to channel demon attacks into predetermined killing zones. His battle brothers had learned to recognize the subtle environmental changes that preceded demon manifestations, their enhanced senses detecting temperature fluctuations and electromagnetic disturbances that provided crucial seconds of warning before enemy contact. The extraction from Signus Secundus proved particularly hazardous due to the agricultural world's unstable atmospheric conditions, which created unpredictable weather patterns that ranged from Arctic blizzards to superheated storms within the span of minutes. The Thunderhawk squadrons assigned to the operation faced wind shears that could flip aircraft without warning, while the corrupted plant life released spores that clogged air filtration systems and caused hallucinations among unprotected personnel. Sergeant Metrion's extraction team reported encounters with demon-possessed agricultural equipment that had developed predatory behaviors, forcing them to fight their way through fields of animated farming machinery. The intelligence gathered during the Signus Campaign provided crucial insights into demon capabilities and tactical preferences that would prove invaluable for future Imperial operations against Chaos forces. Chief Librarian Miros had compiled detailed observations of demon manifestation patterns, noting that different types of entities required specific environmental conditions and psychic triggers to maintain stable presence in real space. The librarian's analysis revealed that greater demons like Ka'Bandha drew their power from emotional resonance and spiritual corruption, making them vulnerable to disruption through focused psychic assault and the presence of individuals with strong spiritual conviction. The Blood Angels' encounters with bloodletters had demonstrated that these lesser demons possessed tactical intelligence that exceeded initial Imperial assessments, their coordination and adaptability suggesting command structures that mirrored conventional military organizations. The demon warriors had shown the ability to learn from battlefield experience, modifying their attack patterns to counter Blood Angels' defensive measures while exploiting weaknesses in Imperial equipment and doctrine. The creatures' supernatural resilience made them difficult to kill with standard bolter fire, requiring concentrated firepower or specialized ammunition to achieve reliable stopping power. Flesh hounds had proven particularly dangerous due to their ability to track psychic emanations across vast distances, making them ideal hunters for pursuing isolated Imperial forces or individuals with latent psychic abilities. The demon beasts had demonstrated pack coordination that suggested collective intelligence, their hunting strategies incorporating complex flanking maneuvers and coordinated attacks that maximized their numerical advantages. The creatures' resistance to conventional weapons had forced Blood Angels' tactical squads to develop new engagement protocols that emphasized heavy weapons and explosive ordnance over traditional small arms fire. The demon engines encountered throughout the system had represented a fusion of chaos technology and corrupted Imperial equipment that created hybrid war machines of devastating effectiveness. These constructs had incorporated components from destroyed Space Marine vehicles, their machine spirits twisted into demon entities that retained technical knowledge while serving malevolent purposes. The engine's weapon systems had shown the ability to adapt their ammunition types and firing patterns based on target analysis, suggesting artificial intelligence capabilities that exceeded even the most sophisticated Imperial designs. The reality warping effects documented throughout the Signus system provided crucial data about the environmental impact of sustained demon presence in real space. The corruption had followed predictable patterns that reflected the nature of the entities responsible, with Khorne-influenced areas showing increased gravitational anomalies and temperature extremes, while regions affected by other chaos powers had displayed different types of distortion. The information would prove essential for developing countermeasures and protective equipment for future operations in demon-infested environments. The psychological warfare techniques employed by the demon forces had demonstrated sophisticated understanding of Space Marine psychology and genetic predispositions, particularly regarding the Blood Angels' vulnerability to the Red Thirst and Black Rage. The demons had used specific combinations of sensory stimuli and psychic emanations to trigger these genetic flaws, creating tactical advantages that conventional enemies could never achieve. The analysis of these techniques revealed patterns that could be used to develop protective measures and early warning systems for identifying corruption attempts. The tactical adaptations developed by Blood Angels' commanders during the campaign had proven effective against demon opponents, but required significant modifications to standard Imperial doctrine. The emphasis on smaller unit deployments and enhanced communication protocols had reduced the effectiveness of demon psychological warfare while maintaining tactical flexibility in rapidly changing combat environments. The integration of librarian support into standard tactical formations had provided crucial protection against psychic attacks while enabling more effective coordination of anti-demon operations. The evacuation of Signus Prime required the most complex extraction operation, as the planet's unstable reality made conventional transportation methods unreliable. The Thunderhawk squadrons faced gravitational anomalies that could crush aircraft or launch them into uncontrolled acceleration, while the atmospheric composition shifted between breathable air and toxic gases without warning. Captain Azkaellin coordinated the Sanguinary Guard's withdrawal from the Cathedral of the Mark, his reduced forces moving through the collapsing structure, while demon stragglers continued to manifest from the deeper levels. The cathedral's destruction had created a massive crater that extended deep into the planet's crust. The dimensional rifts that had supported the structure's impossible architecture, collapsing into a maelstrom of competing gravitational forces. The Sanguinary Guard's extraction required precise timing to avoid the periodic gravity reversals that could trap aircraft or personnel in crushing fields of force. The elite warriors had documented the cathedral's architectural features and defensive systems, providing detailed intelligence about demon construction techniques and the materials used in creating reality-warping structures. The final extraction from Signus Quartus encountered the heaviest demon resistance, as the military world's corrupted defense installations continued to operate under demon control despite the loss of their primary commanders. The automated weapon systems had been modified with demon touch components that gave them targeting capabilities that exceeded their original specifications, while the fortified positions had been reinforced with materials that existed partially outside normal reality. Captain Donatos led the assault on the primary spaceport, his forces fighting through defensive lines that incorporated both conventional military obstacles and supernatural barriers that required specialized techniques to overcome. The warp storm's continued weakening allowed the Blood Angels fleet to begin coordinated maneuvers that had been impossible during the height of the supernatural interference. The Red Tier's navigator reported increasingly stable warp currents that suggested the possibility of safe passage to neighboring star systems, though the routes remained dangerous and unpredictable. The fleet's astropathic choir began detecting faint signals from other Imperial forces, their communications heavily distorted, but carrying enough information to confirm that the broader galaxy remained locked in civil war. The intelligence gathered about warp storm generation and maintenance provided crucial insights into Chaos strategic capabilities that would prove valuable for future Imperial operations. The Blood Angels had observed the complex ritual networks required to sustain large-scale reality distortions, noting the specific demon types and psychic focusing devices necessary for maintaining stable warp barriers. The information revealed potential vulnerabilities in Chaos defensive systems, while highlighting the resources required for similar operations. The evacuation timeline became increasingly critical as the warp storm's dissipation accelerated, creating windows of opportunity that might close without warning if the supernatural weather patterns shifted. Sanguinius coordinated the final extraction phases while monitoring reports from his scattered forces, the Primarch's enhanced intellect processing multiple streams of tactical data to optimize the withdrawal sequence. The Angel's psychic abilities allowed him to sense the approaching stability in local warp currents, but the timing remained uncertain and dependent on factors beyond Imperial control. The strike cruiser Crimson Blade had successfully completed its extraction operations on Signus Sextus, Captain Machariel reporting minimal casualties during the withdrawal from the communications relay station. The world's demon infestation had been less intensive than other planets in the system, allowing for more conventional evacuation procedures despite the presence of reality distortions that affected equipment reliability. The intelligence gathered from the facility's corrupted communication networks provided valuable insights into demon coordination methods and the psychic frequencies used for interdimensional communication. The final tally of intelligence assets recovered from the Signus system included detailed analysis of demon tactical doctrines, weapon capabilities, and environmental manipulation techniques that would prove crucial for future Imperial operations against Chaos forces. The Blood Angels had documented the specific ritual requirements for demon manifestation, the material components necessary for reality warping effects, and the psychological triggers most effective for corrupting Imperial personnel. The information represented a comprehensive database of Chaos capabilities that would inform Imperial strategic planning for years to come. The fleet's preparation for departure required careful coordination of damaged vessels and reduced crew complements, as the casualties sustained during the campaign had left many ships operating below optimal efficiency. The Red Tier's engineering crews worked to optimize power distribution and life support systems to accommodate the additional personnel evacuated from destroyed or critically damaged vessels. The logistical challenges of maintaining fleet cohesion during warp travel with compromised navigation and communication systems required innovative solutions and careful planning. The psychological preparation of Blood Angels personnel for departure from the Signus system involved extensive debriefing sessions and spiritual counseling to help survivors process their experiences and maintain operational effectiveness. The chaplains had developed new therapeutic techniques specifically designed to address trauma related to demon encounters and the corruption of battle brothers. The mental conditioning programs emphasized the importance of maintaining faith and brotherhood while acknowledging the reality of the threats they had faced and might encounter again. The Blood Angels who emerged from the Signus system bore little resemblance to the confident, disciplined force that had answered the fabricated distress calls months earlier. The genetic curse that had lurked within their bloodline for generations had been awakened on an unprecedented scale, transforming fundamental aspects of their combat doctrine and internal culture. Where once the Legion had operated with the controlled aggression of perfectly disciplined warriors, they now carried an undercurrent of barely contained savagery that affected everything from tactical planning to routine training exercises. The changes went far deeper than simple battle damage or personnel losses. The very essence of what it meant to be a Blood Angel had been altered by exposure to the demon-tainted environment of the Signus worlds. Captain Raldoron documented the most obvious manifestations of this transformation in his post-campaign reports, noting that standard combat engagements now required additional oversight to prevent individual Space Marines from becoming lost in bloodlust during routine operations. Battle brothers who had previously shown exemplary fire discipline began experiencing difficulty disengaging from close combat once enemy blood had been spilled, their enhanced senses becoming hyper-focused on the sounds and sense of violence in ways that compromised tactical awareness. The first captain found himself implementing new command protocols that paired potentially affected warriors with steady veterans, creating buddy systems designed to provide immediate intervention when the Red Thirst began manifesting during combat operations. The Legion's assault companies, traditionally the spearhead of Blood Angels' offensive operations, underwent the most dramatic doctrinal changes as their commanders adapted to the increased volatility of their warriors. Where previous tactics had emphasized controlled aggression and precise application of force, the new approaches incorporated containment measures and fallback positions designed to prevent affected Space Marines from pursuing enemies beyond designated operational boundaries. Jump pack assaults, once executed with clockwork precision, now required additional coordination elements and emergency extraction procedures to account for warriors who might become separated from their units while lost in the grip of genetic flaw. Brother Sergeant Castor of the 7th Company had witnessed his entire tactical squad succumb to varying degrees of red thirst during the final evacuation from Cygnus Prime, their disciplined advance through demon-held territory deteriorating into a frenzied charge that left 3 battle brothers dead and 2 others requiring medical restraint. The sergeant's subsequent reports detailed the subtle behavioral changes that preceded full manifestation of the condition: increased aggression during weapon maintenance, heightened sensitivity to the scent of blood during medical procedures, and a tendency to volunteer for the most dangerous assignments regardless of tactical necessity. These observations became the foundation for early warning systems that company commanders used to identify potentially affected personnel before they became liabilities to their units. The psychological screening procedures developed by the Legion's chaplains represented a complete departure from traditional Space Marine mental conditioning programs. Brother Chaplain Astorath had been forced to create entirely new categories of spiritual counseling to address the specific trauma associated with fighting demon opponents and witnessing the corruption of trusted comrades. The traditional techniques of meditation and prayer proved insufficient for warriors who had experienced reality-warping environments and supernatural enemies that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of warfare. The new programs incorporated exposure therapy, designed to desensitize affected Space Marines to blood scent triggers, while simultaneously strengthening their psychological defenses against future corruption attempts. The changes in recruitment practices reflected the Legion's desperate need to identify potential candidates who possessed natural resistance to the genetic flaws that had been so dramatically amplified during the Signus Campaign. The traditional selection criteria that emphasized physical compatibility and basic aptitude testing were supplemented with psychological evaluations designed to identify individuals with exceptional mental discipline and spiritual fortitude. The recruitment cadres began focusing on candidates from populations that had demonstrated resistance to chaos corruption, particularly those from worlds with strong Imperial cult traditions or histories of successful defense against demon incursions. Chief Apothecary Corbula supervised the implementation of enhanced gene seed screening procedures that incorporated lessons learned from analyzing the corrupted genetic material recovered from Signus casualties. The standard implantation protocols were modified to include additional monitoring phases designed to detect early signs of genetic instability, while the progenitor gland cultivation processes were adjusted to eliminate potentially compromised cell lines. The apothecary's research had revealed that exposure to warp energies could create dormant mutations that might not manifest until years after initial implantation, requiring long-term observation programs that extended far beyond traditional training periods. The training regimens developed for new recruits incorporated simulated exposure to the psychological pressures that had proven so devastating during the Signus Campaign. The Legion's training cadres created controlled environments that replicated the sensory overload and reality distortion effects encountered on demon worlds, allowing candidates to develop coping mechanisms before facing actual supernatural threats. These programs included exposure to recordings of demon vocalizations, carefully controlled blood scent triggers, and psychological stress scenarios designed to identify individuals who might be vulnerable to the red thirst under combat conditions. The concealment of the Legion's genetic degradation from other Imperial forces required careful coordination between multiple levels of command and the development of sophisticated deception protocols. Captain Raldoron worked closely with the Legion's senior officers to establish reporting procedures that emphasized tactical victories and operational successes, while minimizing references to the internal challenges affecting unit cohesion and combat effectiveness. The official after-action report submitted to Imperial Command described the Signus Campaign as a successful counter-demon operation that had eliminated a significant chaos threat, with casualty figures that reflected normal combat losses rather than the genetic breakdown that had actually occurred. The medical personnel responsible for treating Blood Angels casualties were briefed on the importance of maintaining operational security regarding the specific nature of injuries and psychological trauma sustained during demon encounters. Standard medical reports were edited to remove references to red thirst episodes and demon-inflicted wounds, with affected personnel being transferred to specialized treatment facilities that operated under enhanced security protocols. The Legion's apothecaries developed alternative explanations for the behavioral changes affecting their battle brothers, attributing increased aggression and psychological instability to combat stress and equipment malfunctions rather than genetic corruption. The integration of Blood Angels forces with other Imperial military units required careful management to prevent exposure of the Legion's compromised condition. Company commanders were instructed to avoid joint operations that might reveal the extent of their warriors' psychological instability, while liaison officers received additional training in deflecting questions about unusual tactical modifications or behavioral patterns. The Legion's participation in combined arms operations was limited to roles that minimized direct interaction with other Imperial forces, with Blood Angels units typically assigned to independent objectives or specialized missions that justified their operational isolation. The long-term strategic implications of the Legion's transformation became apparent as the Horus heresy progressed, and the Blood Angels found themselves increasingly unable to fulfill their traditional role as rapid response specialists. The psychological monitoring requirements and containment protocols necessary to manage affected personnel reduced deployment flexibility and increased logistical overhead, making it difficult to maintain the operational tempo that had characterized their previous campaigns. The Legion's commanders were forced to decline mission assignments that would have been routine before the Signus Campaign, citing equipment shortages or personnel redeployment rather than revealing their actual limitations. The development of specialized equipment designed to assist in managing the Red Thirst represented a significant departure from standard Imperial military doctrine. The Legion's Tech Marines created modified power armor systems that incorporated biometric monitoring devices capable of detecting the physiological changes that preceded genetic breakdown, while weapon systems were equipped with remote disable functions that could be activated if a warrior became lost to bloodlust. These modifications required extensive testing and calibration to ensure effectiveness without compromising combat performance, creating additional burdens on already strained technical personnel. The tactical doctrine modifications implemented throughout the Legion reflected the need to accommodate warriors whose combat effectiveness had become unpredictable and potentially dangerous to their own units. Standard engagement protocols were revised to include specific procedures for dealing with affected battle brothers, while command structures were modified to ensure that multiple officers could assume control if primary leaders became compromised by genetic breakdown. The new doctrines emphasized defensive positions and controlled advances rather than the aggressive assault tactics that had previously defined Blood Angels' combat philosophy. The psychological impact on unaffected Legion personnel created secondary challenges that affected overall morale and unit cohesion. Veterans who had served for decades without experiencing genetic instability found themselves constantly monitoring their own behavior for signs of corruption, their enhanced awareness of the condition's symptoms creating anxiety that potentially increased their vulnerability to the very problems they sought to avoid. The brotherhood that had traditionally bound Blood Angels together was strained by the necessity of maintaining surveillance over trusted comrades, creating an atmosphere of suspicion and distrust that undermined the personal relationships essential for effective small unit operations. The training modifications required to prepare new recruits for the psychological challenges of serving in a legion affected by genetic instability created additional complications for an already complex indoctrination process. The traditional Blood Angels training programs had emphasized brotherhood, loyalty, and controlled aggression as core values, but the post-Signus reality required candidates to understand that their trusted battle brothers might become enemies without warning. The psychological preparation necessary to function effectively in this environment challenged fundamental assumptions about Space Marine conditioning and forced the development of entirely new approaches to warrior psychology. The intelligence gathered during the Signus Campaign about demon corruption techniques and psychological warfare methods influenced the Legion's approach to future operations against chaos forces. The Blood Angels had learned that their genetic heritage made them particularly vulnerable to specific types of warp-based attacks, requiring the development of specialized countermeasures and protective protocols. The tactical intelligence collected about demon manifestation patterns and reality warping effects became part of the Legion's institutional knowledge, informing strategic planning and operational procedures for subsequent campaigns. The recruitment challenges facing the Legion extended beyond simple numerical replacement to encompass fundamental questions about genetic compatibility and long-term viability. The corruption of gene seed stocks had reduced the pool of viable genetic material available for creating new Space Marines, while the enhanced screening procedures eliminated additional candidates who might have been acceptable under previous standards. The recruitment cadres found themselves competing with other legions for a reduced pool of suitable candidates while maintaining higher standards that further limited their options. The medical research programs initiated to better understand the genetic changes affecting the Legion required resources and expertise that were difficult to obtain during the ongoing civil war. Chief Apothecary Corbulo coordinated with Mechanicum researchers and Imperial medical specialists to develop new treatment protocols and preventive measures, but the sensitive nature of the research required careful security measures that limited collaboration opportunities. The studies revealed that the genetic modifications triggered by demon exposure were more complex than initially understood, involving changes to neurochemical pathways and hormone production systems that affected multiple aspects of Space Marine physiology. The strategic deployment patterns adopted by the Legion reflected their reduced capability for independent operations and increased reliance on supporting elements from other Imperial forces. Blood Angels companies were increasingly assigned to secondary roles within larger Imperial operations, their specialized skills utilized for specific tactical objectives while avoiding situations that might expose their psychological vulnerabilities. The Legion's reputation for aggressive assault tactics was gradually modified to emphasize their effectiveness in defensive operations and specialized anti-demon warfare, creating a new tactical identity that masked their internal challenges while maintaining operational relevance. The development of new command structures and leadership protocols reflected the need to maintain operational effectiveness despite the unpredictable nature of genetic breakdown among senior personnel. The traditional Blood Angels hierarchy was supplemented with redundant command elements and cross-training programs designed to ensure continuity of leadership if key officers became compromised by the Red Thirst. These modifications required extensive reorganization of existing units and the development of new communication protocols that could function effectively under degraded command conditions. The transformation of the Blood Angels Legion during the Signus Campaign created reverberations that would echo through 10 millennia of Imperial history, fundamentally altering not only the chapter's character, but also establishing precedents for how the Imperium would confront the demon threat in future conflicts. The genetic awakening triggered by Ka'Bandha's psychological warfare became a defining characteristic that would shape every subsequent generation of Sanguinius's gene sons, creating a duality between noble aspiration and barely contained savagery that became their most recognizable trait. The changes went far beyond tactical modifications or temporary psychological trauma. They represented a permanent alteration to the Legion's genetic heritage that would manifest in increasingly dramatic ways as the millennia passed. The official Imperial records of the Signus Campaign, compiled by the Administratum's Historical Division decades after the Horus Heresy's conclusion, presented a sanitized version of events that emphasized tactical victories while carefully omitting any reference to the genetic breakdown that had actually occurred. These documents described the operation as a successful counter-demon campaign that demonstrated Imperial resilience against chaos corruption, with the Blood Angels portrayed as heroic defenders who had eliminated a significant threat to Imperial territory. The casualty figures were adjusted to reflect normal combat losses rather than the extensive psychological casualties and genetic degradation that had actually taken place. The deliberate concealment of the Red Thirst's awakening served multiple strategic purposes within the broader Imperial hierarchy. The Administratum scribes understood that revealing the extent of genetic instability within an entire Space Marine Legion could undermine confidence in the Emperor's genetic engineering program and potentially trigger investigations into other legions' genetic heritage. The sanitized records also prevented potential enemies from learning about specific vulnerabilities that could be exploited in future conflicts, while maintaining the Blood Angels' reputation as reliable Imperial defenders capable of independent operations. The modifications made to official documentation required coordination between multiple Imperial agencies and the development of sophisticated information control protocols. The Inquisition's early organizational structures incorporated lessons learned from the Signus cover-up, establishing procedures for managing sensitive information about Space Marine genetic flaws and demon corruption techniques. These protocols would later prove essential for concealing similar problems within other chapters and maintaining the facade of Astartes' genetic purity that formed a cornerstone of Imperial propaganda. The strategic lessons derived from the Signus Campaign fundamentally altered Imperial doctrine regarding operations in demon-infested environments, though the specific details remained classified at the highest levels of military command. The tactical intelligence gathered about reality warping effects and psychological warfare techniques influenced the development of specialized equipment and training programs designed to protect Imperial forces from similar corruption attempts. The Adeptus Munitorum began incorporating anti-demon protocols into standard operating procedures, while the Ecclesiarchy developed new spiritual protection rituals based on observations of how faith-based resistance had proven effective against warp-based attacks. The influence of Signus extended into the development of Imperial Guard doctrine for dealing with chaos incursions, particularly regarding the psychological preparation necessary for fighting supernatural enemies. The training programs developed for Guard regiments began incorporating exposure to simulated demon encounters and psychological conditioning designed to prevent mass panic when facing reality-warping opponents. The tactical modifications emphasized the importance of maintaining unit cohesion and communication discipline when operating in environments where conventional military logic might not apply. The Mechanicum's analysis of demon-corrupted technology recovered from the Signus worlds provided crucial insights into the methods used by Chaos forces to subvert Imperial equipment and infrastructure. The Tech Priests documented specific corruption patterns and developed countermeasures that could be implemented to protect critical systems from demon influence. These discoveries influenced the design of future Imperial technology, with machine spirits receiving enhanced protective protocols and sacred oils being reformulated to provide better resistance against warp taint. Ka'Bandha's survival of his confrontation with Sanguinius established a personal enmity that would span the millennia, with the Greater Demon's hatred for the Blood Angels becoming a driving force behind numerous chaos incursions throughout Imperial history. The Bloodthirster's intimate knowledge of the Legion's genetic weaknesses made him uniquely dangerous to Sanguinius's descendants, his understanding of their psychological triggers allowing him to orchestrate corruption campaigns with devastating effectiveness. The demon's ability to manifest in real space whenever sufficient blood had been spilled created opportunities for recurring confrontations that would test each generation of Blood Angels' leadership. The first documented reappearance of Ka'Bandha occurred during the 32nd millennium, when the demon manifested during a Blood Angels campaign against Orc forces in the Ghoul Stars. The Greater Demon's presence triggered widespread Red Thirst episodes among the chapter's battle brothers, recreating the psychological warfare conditions that had proven so effective during the original Signus encounter. Chapter Master Amit found himself fighting the same type of multi-dimensional battle that Sanguinius had faced, though his own abilities proved insufficient to achieve the decisive victory that his Gene Father had accomplished. The pattern of Ka'Bandha's interventions revealed his strategic understanding of Blood Angels' operations and his ability to exploit their genetic vulnerabilities at critical moments. The demon consistently appeared during campaigns where the chapter was already under stress, using their existing psychological pressure to amplify the effects of his corruption techniques. His manifestations often coincided with major battles where Blood Angels' forces were committed to protecting Imperial civilians, exploiting their noble instincts to create situations where genetic breakdown would have the maximum tactical impact. The recurring confrontations between Ka'Bandha and successive generations of Blood Angels leaders became legendary within the chapter, though the specific details remained closely guarded secrets known only to the highest levels of command. Each encounter provided the demon with additional intelligence about the chapter's evolving tactics and genetic condition, while simultaneously teaching the Blood Angels more about their ancient enemy's capabilities and limitations. The cyclical nature of these battles created a form of evolutionary pressure that shaped both the chapter's development and the demon's tactical approaches. The influence of the Signus Campaign on Blood Angels' recruitment practices became more pronounced as the chapter's genetic flaws manifested with increasing frequency throughout the millennia. The screening procedures developed in the aftermath of Ka'Bandha's initial defeat were continuously refined and enhanced as new manifestations of genetic instability were discovered. The chapter's apothecaries maintained detailed records of bloodline compatibility and genetic markers that could predict vulnerability to the Red Thirst and Black Rage, creating a comprehensive database that guided recruitment decisions across multiple star systems. The development of specialized containment facilities and treatment protocols for affected battle brothers represented a significant departure from standard Astartes medical practices. The Blood Angels established secure medical complexes on their homeworld of Baal and several other chapter strongholds. These facilities designed to house space marines who had succumbed to genetic breakdown while researching potential treatments and preventive measures. The medical staff assigned to these facilities required specialized training in dealing with superhuman patients whose enhanced strength and combat reflexes remained intact despite their psychological instability. The chapter's relationship with other Imperial forces evolved throughout the millennia as their reputation for genetic instability became known within certain circles of Imperial command. While their combat effectiveness remained unquestioned, strategic planners began factoring the potential for psychological breakdown into operational assessments when deploying Blood Angels forces. The chapter found itself increasingly assigned to independent operations or specialized missions that minimized the risk of their genetic flaws affecting other Imperial units, creating a form of tactical isolation that both protected their secrets and limited their strategic flexibility. The technological innovations developed by Blood Angels, Tech Marines, to manage their genetic heritage influenced broader Imperial understanding of Space Marine physiology and the potential for technological intervention in genetic disorders. The monitoring systems and containment protocols created for dealing with the Red Thirst provided templates that other chapters adapted for managing their own genetic peculiarities. The research conducted by Blood Angels medical personnel contributed to the broader Imperial knowledge base regarding Space Marine genetics and the long-term effects of genetic modification. The spiritual practices developed by Blood Angels chaplains to help their battle brothers cope with genetic instability influenced the evolution of Space Marine religious doctrine throughout the Imperium. The rituals and meditation techniques created to strengthen psychological resistance against the Red Thirst were adapted by other chapters facing different types of genetic or psychological challenges. The theological framework developed to explain and contextualize genetic flaws within the broader Imperial faith provided models that other chapters used to address their own spiritual and genetic challenges. The tactical innovations pioneered by Blood Angels commanders in response to their genetic limitations influenced broader Imperial military doctrine regarding the management of unreliable or potentially compromised personnel. The buddy system protocols and enhanced command structures developed to maintain unit effectiveness despite genetic instability were adapted for use in Imperial Guard formations and other military organizations. The communication procedures and emergency response protocols created for dealing with affected Space Marines provided templates for managing similar challenges in other elite military units. The intelligence gathered during the Signus Campaign about demon psychology and corruption techniques became part of the Imperial knowledge base regarding chaos threats, though access to this information remained strictly controlled. The tactical analysis of demon manifestation patterns and reality warping effects influenced the development of specialized military units trained to operate in warp-corrupted environments. The psychological warfare countermeasures developed by Blood Angels personnel were incorporated into training programs for other Imperial forces likely to encounter similar threats. The long-term strategic impact of the Blood Angels' genetic awakening extended beyond the chapter itself to influence Imperial policy regarding Space Marine genetic purity and the management of genetic flaws within the Astartes. The successful concealment of the chapter's condition demonstrated that genetic instability could be managed without compromising overall combat effectiveness, providing precedents for how other chapters might address their own genetic challenges. The administrative and medical protocols developed for managing the Blood Angels' situation became templates that were adapted for use with other genetically compromised chapters. The evolution of Blood Angels' combat doctrine throughout the millennia reflected their ongoing struggle to balance their genetic heritage with their tactical effectiveness. The chapter's emphasis on close-quarters combat and aggressive assault tactics was gradually modified to incorporate safeguards and containment measures designed to prevent genetic breakdown from compromising mission success. The development of specialized formations and tactical roles that could accommodate affected battle brothers allowed the chapter to maintain operational effectiveness while managing their genetic limitations. The cultural impact of the Signus Campaign within Blood Angels' tradition created a complex mythology that combined historical fact with spiritual allegory. The chapter's remembrancers developed epic poems and artistic works that portrayed the campaign as a test of faith and genetic purity, emphasizing the noble sacrifice required to resist chaos corruption while acknowledging the ongoing struggle against their inherited flaws. These cultural works served both as historical records and as spiritual guidance for future generations of Blood Angels, providing context and meaning for their genetic heritage. The establishment of the Signus Campaign as a foundational event in Blood Angels' history influenced the chapter's approach to training and indoctrination throughout the subsequent millennia. New recruits were taught detailed accounts of the campaign's events as part of their spiritual and tactical education, learning both the practical lessons about demon warfare and the deeper truths about their genetic heritage. The campaign became a touchstone for understanding the duality of their nature and the constant vigilance required to maintain their humanity while wielding superhuman power. As the 41st millennium dawned and the Imperium faced its greatest challenges since the Horus Heresy, the legacy of the Signus Campaign remained embedded in every aspect of Blood Angels' culture and doctrine. The genetic awakening triggered by Ka'Bandha's psychological warfare had created a chapter that embodied both the noblest aspirations of humanity and its darkest impulses, their ongoing struggle against their inherited flaws serving as a microcosm of the broader Imperial battle against chaos corruption. The lessons learned in the demon-haunted depths of the Signus system continued to guide the chapter's actions, their hard-won knowledge of chaos tactics and corruption techniques making them among the Imperium's most effective defenders against the eternal threat of the warp. The Blood Angels who fought in the 41st millennium carried within their genetic code the scars of that ancient campaign, their enhanced abilities forever coupled with the potential for genetic breakdown that Ka'Bandha had awakened. Yet this burden had also become their greatest strength, their understanding of their own darkness allowing them to resist corruption that might overwhelm other Imperial forces. The Signus Campaign had transformed them from perfect warriors into flawed heroes, and in that transformation, they had perhaps become more human than any of their brother chapters, forever walking the knife's edge between salvation and damnation, their nobility made more precious by the constant threat of its loss.